Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Helped the Heroes as a Villain Spy. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Aizawa Shoyuda was having a no-good, horribly wrong, very much not cool day. It had started off surprisingly well, which should have been his first warning. He had gotten 5 hours of sleep instead of his normal. He had an email in his inbox approving his adoption of a kitten from a nearby shelter. His husband hadn't burned the coffee for once, and he had one left of his favorite juice packet to shove in his pocket to drink later in his shift. Yeah, it was a pretty good day. Until he was brought into a meeting with 5 other heroes, who he couldn't be bothered to name, 2 detectives from the Mizudafu Police Department that were unfortunately familiar to him, and a file the size of an encyclopedia in front of him. And to top it all off, he was the only underground hero present. I can see many things wrong with this plan, the first being that literally all of you are well-known figures. He drawled, leaning back into his chair as he processed the information he had been told. Apparently, there was a quickly growing gang in the area, simply titled the Kings. They had been linked to several murders, new drags, kidnappings, and just reigning general terror on the citizens of Mizudafu. Tsukachi, and thus the police department, had formed a small task force of heroes in order to take it down. They had discovered an illegal quirk fighting ring run by the Kings, and were proposing that Aizawa and one of the other heroes sneak in to gather more intel. Although, he couldn't really see what was left to be learned with the size stack of papers in front of him. He voiced his thoughts. Besides, it looks like you have more than enough information as it is. Tsukachi shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's the true objective of this mission. Verify as much info as you can. This was given to us anonymously. With how detailed and specific it is, we've concluded that it must have come from someone on the inside. However, the Kings know that we've been trying to catch some of the more powerful people in the organization. We don't know if it's trying to trick us into going for a full-fledged assault or actually someone trying to help. Aizawa grouched but saw the logic behind it. He gave a long-suffering sigh, looking up at the ceiling and pinching his nose before meeting Tsukachi's eyes again. I'm in. That how he found himself sitting in a packed and noisy stadium, hood over his head as he observed the crowds from the shadows it cast over his face. Beside him sat Miruko. The number 5 pro hero wouldn't have been his first choice for a stealth mission, but she was the best off from the 5 heroes that had agreed to help the MPD. Her quirk, Rabbit, made her an excellent eavesdropper, and contrary to popular belief, Aizawa knew she knew when to keep her mouth closed. Additionally, her strength and speed made Aizawa a bit more comfortable walking into the lion's den. She was fully cloaked from head to toe, her rabbit ears folded down against her head, though she had assured him it wouldn't impede her hearing. They were sat directly under what Aizawa assumed to be either the announcer's box or the VIP seating. It was little more than an alcove with walls holding up the seating above them, separating them from the rest of the crowd, and filled with benches, metal railings separating them from the arena 15 feet below them. Due to the horrible lighting and less than stellar view of the entrance to the arena, it was empty save for them. Good, Aizawa thought. Fewer people to take notice of us. Keep an ear on the people above us, Aizawa said to his partner, the woman uncharacteristically quiet as her ears twitched under her hood. They have the best view and should have the most important people. She nodded, and he focused back on the fight before them, trusting her to get his attention if needed. It was a bloody fight, the 2 people duking it out with and without quirks. Each successful blow landed prompted loud cheers and boos, the viewers shouting bets and encouragements. Eventually the favored winner of the fight, a man with a quick that allowed him to infect anyone he landed a 5-finger touch on with poison, won, his opponent falling to the ground, unmoving. It happened again and again and again, the poison maker spreading his arms and roaring after each victory. The viewers quickly grew tired of the same person winning, it obviously not as violent and bloody as they were accustomed to. Bring the lion out, bring the lion out. A chant started as Miruko hissed, "Eraser," at him. The chant grew in volume as stomping and clapping carried the rhythm. Aizawa tuned it out, looking at Miruko. She peeped her head towards the ceiling, eyes screwed shut. "They want you back out there," she echoed, repeating the conversation above to him. "Are you well enough to fight?" "I'm well enough to do whatever you ask of me." There was a pause, Miruko opening her eyes to look at him. The first was someone important, everyone was real respectful of him earlier, but nothing important was said. This is the first time I've heard the second one, but he's been in the room the entire time. She ped her head back towards the ceiling, the conversation obviously continuing. "Pius, you say that you will do what I ask you, and yet we have incidents like last week's fight. It won't happen again." Miruko's voice grew quiet and Aizawa could only assume that meant the speakers did too. "I've learned my lesson." "I should hope you have. You would think that after so long with me you would realize that my word is law." She paused for a second, and then, "Well, the people want the lion so they shall have their lion. Give them a show, would you?" Aizawa and Miruko looked back out over the railing, a blur flying off of the balcony above them. It seemed to shift in midair, and a large lion landed on the poison maker's shoulders, knocking him to the ground. He never stood a chance. The crowd roared gleefully, rattling and shaking the chain-link fence that separated the other sections of seating from the arena. The lion stepped off of the unmoving man. It planted its feet, opening its bloody maw and roaring, the sound drawing dust from the ceiling of the hero's hideout. Miruko yelped, pressing a hand over her hood onto her ears. For the first time in his career, Aizawa saw Miruko's eyes widen with fear. "What?" he demanded, and she looked at him, seeming to remember something as her shoulders squared and her face became smooth once again. "He's trouble," she admitted quietly. "Dangerous." Aizawa watched as men and women alike jumped the fence into the arena, each intent on taking a chance on defeating the lion. It whirled around the area, bouncing off walls and skidding along the floor. Its deadly paws and mouth were soon dyed red, chest heaving as it dispatched person after person. Aizawa felt himself grow sick, but forced himself to watch. Eventually, there was a lull in the influx of willing fighters, the grim fates their friends faced at the hands of the beast suddenly reinforcing the fact that it was seemingly unbeatable. The lion's form shifted and blurred once again, only this time it revealed a lithe body. They were too far away to see any specifics, but Aizawa could see that he still had a lion's tail and ears perched in his green hair. The tail lashed behind him as he tilted his head back, once again roaring. This time, however, Aizawa didn't hear a challenge. Instead, there was an incredible sadness in the sound, a resignation that didn't belong there. The crowd obviously didn't agree with him, cheering for the figure. He looked up and Aizawa jolted as he thought he was looking at the heroes, but he soon realized that the Lion Man was looking above them, at the VIP seating. There must have been some kind of signal because the man took a few steps back, crouching down and taking a few running steps forwards, easily bounding up onto the first level of railing. He walked gracefully along it, baring his bloody teeth to the delight of the crowd. He bounced from level to level, attention eventually drawn from him back to the arena as another fight started. It was all well enough to Aizawa, because the figure was now perched, crouching on their railing. His blood ran cold. The boy couldn't have been any older than 15 or 16, the same age as the students he taught at UA. His eyes glowed green in the dark, his nose slightly too wide to be fully human, the ears on the top of his head and tail lashing behind him clearly not. He absent-mindedly ran a tongue over his lips, exposing still bloody fangs. He bounced gracefully into the alcove, and Aizawa's senses screamed predator at him. He prepared for a fight, slightly pushing up his sleeves to free his capture weapon from where it was wrapped around his forearms. "You shouldn't be here," the boy stated, the pleading tone in his voice making Aizawa pause. "What do you mean?" Miruko questioned, shifting slightly. "We thought this was open seating?" The boy hissed in displeasure at the woman's ruse, tail flicking and nose twitching. "Stay where you are," he growled, lithely hopping back onto the railing and up into the VIP box. "Are we staying?" Miruko asked, making Aizawa scoff. "Of course not, we've been blown. We need to go now." They hurried to the door, throwing it open. The boy was standing right outside it. Aizawa reared back, expecting an attack only to realize the boy was alone, and holding his hands up in surrender. "I've bought us a few minutes," he started, voice low and rushed. "I can get you to an exit, but you have to trust me." Miruko scoffed. "Why would we trust someone who literally has blood on their hands?" The boy flinched, hiding his red hands behind his back, and even Aizawa thought that was a low blow. "Because," the boy started hesitantly, taking a half a step towards them. "I wouldn't go through all the trouble to get the folder to the police just to let their recon mission get screwed." "You sent the information?" Aizawa demanded, and the boy nodded, glancing down the hallway as yelling and shouting came from the direction of the stairs. "I did, and we really need to go now." "Like right now?" Aizawa hesitated but nodded, stepping after him. The boy's face lit up, and he turned to scamper off, leading them through a maze of tunnels that Aizawa expected was the sewer system. The shouting from behind them only spurred them forwards, the occasional gunshot echoing through the tunnels making both Miruko and the boy flinch at the loud noise. They climbed a ladder and emerged into a side alleyway, much closer to the police department than Aizawa had guessed. The heroes started in that direction, the boy pausing by the manhole they had come from. "This is as far as I go," he told them. Aizawa frowned. "What are you talking about?" he demanded brusquely. "You need to tell the police everything you know." The boy shook his head, glancing back down nervously. The shouting was growing louder. "If I talk, they'll know. Your best bet is to take the info that I already gave you and plan a full-scale invasion of their headquarters. Its location should be on page. I'll hold them off." "Kid, we're not gonna just leave you with them," Miruko said, stepping towards him and reaching out. That was the wrong thing to do. He reared back, ears flattening and teeth baring in a hiss. 3 days, he said, making eye contact with Aizawa. "I'll be expecting you." He started climbing back down the ladder. "Wait," Aizawa called, making him glance up in annoyance. "What's your name?" The boy thought for a moment before offering him a tiny smile. "Izuku. Midoriya Izuku." Angry didn't even begin to cover Aizawa's current mood. After the boy, Izuku, his traitorous mind whispered, "The one you failed to save," had disappeared back down the manhole cover. It was only Miruko's quick thinking and above-average strength that had kept him from jumping down after him. She had handled the debrief back at the police station, Aizawa's mind a whirlwind of glowing green eyes and bloody teeth, the heartbreaking roar echoing in his head over and over again. He only spoke up once, eyes flashing red and hair floating above his head as he glared at the people in the room. 3 days, he had said, voice tight and deathly calm. "And I'm going back. With or without you." Tsukachi gave him a sympathetic smile, sliding a thin folder towards him. Of course, the man nodded, knowing how much cases with children affected him. "We'll get him out," Eraserhead. "Don't worry about that." Aizawa had simply taken the folder, refusing to open it. Now it sat on his desk in his classroom at U1, seemingly glaring at him. He glared back and glanced at the clock. He should have enough time to read through it before his class came in, but he was confident that his class wouldn't disturb him if he ran over a bit. It was only the second day of school, but he knew that his current class was one of the rare few that had potential. He flipped it open, flinching when wide and innocent eyes appeared in an attached picture. Midoriya appeared much younger in the photo, the small description on the back of it identifying him as 10, the last time his photo was updated in the Quirk registry. He set the photo aside, and as Aizawa read through the rest of the admittedly short history, he could see why that was. The boy had lived an exceedingly average life in a spectacularly average home, only one interaction with the police, and that was a noise complaint for the Midoriya apartment when he was, and then his mother died. The case was cut and dried. Someone had left a stove on and burned down the apartment complex when Midoriya was his mother was one of the few casualties in the tragic accident. After that, slowly but surely, the boy was phased out of society. He no longer went to the doctor for checkups, he was soon pulled from school, and the only people who noticed his absence was a small report filed by a local grocery store clerk. According to it, the boy had come in on the same day at the same time he always had, except this time his cheek was badly bruised and he had made a comment about remembering to not making his father mad. The next week he didn't show, prompting the clerk to make the report. The police had gone to the address his father had reported as their new place of residence, only to find that the father and son were nowhere to be found. The next time anyone saw the boy was Aizawa the previous night. Aizawa leaned back in his chair, contemplating the story. How did an average boy go from the suburbs to an underground fighting ring? He mused, chin buried in his capture weapon as he stared at the photo sitting on his desk. However, he wasn't the only one. Bakugo stopped short on his way to sit down, passing by Aizawa's desk. His face went pale, hands crackling unintentionally as he zoned in on the picture of the boy. "Why do you have a picture of Deku?" he demanded, red eyes furious as he looked up to meet his teacher's gaze. His voice grew louder, a desperate undertone, as he dropped his bag and lunged towards the hero, hands held in front of him, roaring. "Where did you get a picture of Deku?" Aizawa reacted on instinct, grabbing the boy's outstretched hand and sidestepping his lunge. He twisted the hand behind Bakugo's back, shoving him into the chalkboard and activating his quirk. The explosions in the boy's hands stopped, but his thrashing and yelling didn't. Aizawa whipped out his phone, dialing a number on instinct. "Namuri? I need you to watch my class. I have some things to take care of." Not waiting for a response, Aizawa messily grabbed the papers still strewn over his desk, shoving them back into the file. He grabbed Bakugo's bag in one hand, the other maneuvering the boy to walk to the door, the arm still held behind his back, forcing him to slightly hunch over. Aizawa blinked, looking back at his stunned class. "Behave," he growled, whisking past Midnight and her questioning look. He ignored Bakugo's protests, manhandling the boy into an empty room, shoving him down into a chair. "How do you know Midoriya?" he demanded, the boy growling at him as he rubbed his wrist, but answering all the same. "I grew up with the shitty nerd. We've been together since diapers." His voice grew softer. "At least we were." Aizawa nodded slowly, sitting against the teacher's desk in the room. And then he disappeared. Bakugo nodded in agreement. "We were just playing with some other extras in the neighborhood when his dad called him home. We made plans to meet the next day, but he never showed and I figured he was just grounded or something. His dad was weird like that. When I finally went to his house it was empty and they were gone. That was the last time I saw him." He took a deep breath, seemingly steeling himself for his next words. "How did he die?" Aizawa was shocked enough that it took him several moments to form an answer. "Die?" he asked, the boy glaring at him once again, eyes significantly wetter than they had been. "I said what I said," he growled, roughly rubbing at his face. His voice was thick when he next spoke. "There's no way the nerd would ever stay away for that long unless he was dead. He promised me we would be heroes together." "Bakugo," Aizawa started slowly, trying to be as delicate as he knew how to be. "Midoriya isn't dead. He's alive and I'm going to bring him home." Aizawa swept into his home with all the grace of a hurricane. He flopped on the couch, groaning as loudly and longly as humanly possible. He was only cut off by a weight settling on his chest, his cat Tipsy flopping down and pushing all the air from his lungs. He settled a hand on Tipsy's back, the warm rumblings slightly soothing him. Hitoshi peered around the corner of the kitchen door, eyebrows furrowing. "Are you okay?" Aizawa sighed, sitting up and making his way to the kitchen, Tipsy meowing in outrage at him before stalking off to find somewhere else to lay. Aizawa sat at the dinner table, Hizashi and Hitoshi already waiting expectantly on him, each working on various school things. "It's complicated," he finally started, making Hizashi laugh fondly. "When isn't it?" He became slightly more serious. "Is it about the case you were pulled into yesterday?" Aizawa nodded. "Is it about what had Bakugo so tore up this morning in class?" Aizawa nodded once more, this time at Hitoshi. "There's a new gang in Mizudafu, one that the MPD is worried enough about to create a task force for. An anonymous source gave them almost more information than they knew what to do with. Miruko and I were sent to an underground quirk fighting ring to try to verify some of the info when our cover was blown. The person on the inside, who gave the police the information in the first place, helped us escape but gave himself up to make sure we got out." Aizawa looked up at the ceiling. He was only 16 years old. Hizashi gave a sharp inhale and Hitoshi cursed softly. Aizawa plowed on. "I was looking over his file before class and Bakugo saw the picture. Apparently they were childhood friends, and Bakugu thought Midoriya was dead. It was quite the shock finding out he wasn't. "You don't say," Hitoshi snorted, going to start a pot of coffee. Fondness flooded Aizawa as he watched his adoptive son putter about the kitchen. "What's the plan?" Hisashi asked, drawing Aizawa's attention back to him. "Surely the police don't intend to let them get away with this? What about the boy's parents?" Aizawa shrugged. "Midoriya said he would be expecting us in 3 days. Tsukachi knows they do this with me or I do it by myself. Midoriya's father is unknown but his mother is dead. He has no other family." Hisashi nodded in determination, laying a hand on Aizawa's own. "You won't be alone," he stated. "Put your hands up, we'll back you every step of the way." Aizawa gave him a small smile, accepting the coffee Hitoshi offered him. "Why 3 days?" the teen questioned, making Aizawa pause. He hadn't thought about that. Maybe he has his own plans? "To support you guys from the inside." Worry flooded through Aizawa, replacing his previous affection for his family. "He could be dead for all we know," he bit out, angrily sipping on his coffee. Hisashi kicked him from under the table, scowling lightly. "Don't say that. He is alive, we will rescue him, and everything will be okay." Aizawa sighed, resting his head in his hands. Logically, he had no choice but to wait. But that didn't mean he had to like it. He looked back up, chugging the last of his coffee. It'd better be okay. Izuku was not okay. He didn't regret obsessively listing every illegal activity he knew the kings had a hand in, analyzing all the quirks he could see, acting the perfect part to make his way into the inner circle. Ryo, the King of Kings as he liked to be called, was an absolute a-hole, but he was also astoundingly oblivious, allowing Izuku to question him on every aspect of the gang with little to no suspicion. Izuku also didn't regret helping the 2 pro-heroes escape. The minute he had smelled them entering the room below him, he had panicked, assuming they were the vanguard to a larger assault he wasn't expecting, at least not yet. Yet they had stayed in the room and Izuku had realized they were there getting research. Irritation flashed through him. What, was my literal book of information not good enough for them? He groused to himself from his place standing to the back and left of Ryo's chair. He stood, stock-still and silent, the perfect ace up Ryo's sleeve. He slowly allowed himself to relax, feeling confident that he wouldn't fight that night, only for a loud chant the crowd started to bring all the tension back. His shoulders still twinged with pain from the beating bestowed upon him the previous weekend, a punishment for refusing to kill an unwilling participant. He didn't have that luxury tonight. He put on the show that was expected of him, playing his role flawlessly. He killed and laughed and made himself sick. But he had a goal, one much larger than taking down the kings, and he needed the 2 heroes to make it out alive. So he ensured they did, leading the kings on a wild goose chase after him, overjoyed when they caught him and learned that they didn't know anything about the heroes. Ryo's boot landed on the side of his head, grinding it into the sandy floor of the arena, drawing him from his thoughts. He grit his teeth in irritation as something was snapped around the sensitive base of his tail, his neck, and his wrists. He remained silent as they dragged him to the wall, hanging him up and beating the ever-loving sheet out of him. He closed his eyes, reminding himself of why he was doing what he was doing, silent even as electricity flowed through his veins, making him arch as far off the wall as he could. He hung limply, the burning pull on his joints from the chains not allowing him to fully dissociate. Eventually the kings grew tired of his unwillingness to scream and plead as they wanted, all of them but Ryo filing away. He gripped Izuku's chin, raising his head and studying him with cold eyes. "I own you," Ryo finally hissed, his grip tightening painfully on Izuku's jaw. "I've given you too much freedom. Your place is at my feet like the animal you are." He let go of Izuku's chin with a disgusted sound. "You would do well to remember that." Izuku just stared at him for a moment before hanging his head and closing his eyes once again. Only when he was sure he was alone, yet still watched, did he look up. He roared, thrashing against the chains as hard as he dared to without breaking them. He snarled and growled, only half faking his frustration at his situation. He needed Ryo to think that Izuku was still valuable, that he could still be broken down and molded into the perfect pawn. That was the only way Izuku would avoid being killed before the heroes came. But it didn't mean he had to like it. He let his act fall, sagging into the chains in apparent weariness, but his ears stayed poised on his head, waiting for any indication that someone was approaching, smugness filtering through him as he fought to keep his lips from curling in satisfaction. He didn't know what the hero's plans were, he didn't even know if Eraserhead would abide by his request for 3 days, but all he needed to do was make the kings complacent. Let Ryo think that he was pushing Izuku ever closer to breaking, but in the end it wouldn't be Izuku who broke. No, he would beg and plead and say he was sorry. He would swear his loyalty to the kings, and smile at Ryo, and be the perfect left hand once again. And then, when the heroes were knocking at Ryo's front door and he was looking to Izuku for protection, Izuku would smile once again. He would tear them apart from the inside out, show them exactly what kind of animal he was. Yes, Izuku thought in satisfaction, closing his eyes as a pleased chuff rose in his throat, exactly where he wanted to be. I'll show them what a real king looks like. The absolute boredom Izuku was experiencing was enough to make him reconsider his plan. Surely there were easier ways to spend his final days with the gang. The first day after he had been captured he had been left alone, Ryo's way of conveying to Izuku that he wasn't the top priority at the moment, which was absolute horseshit because Izuku was good at what he did and he knew that. Izuku played the part of uncaring dissenter for about 12 hours before he broke, screaming and yelling into the empty room. First he started with anger, cursing Ryo and the kings, telling them exactly what he thought of them with the multitude of unflattering adjectives and phrases that he had been creating during his years with the kings. Then, when no one came to see him, he began throwing in some haughty accusations. How he could be a better king than Ryo ever was, which was true, and all the things that were wrong with the current power dynamics and rules in the kings, also true. If Ryo was a king, then the man who raised and trained Izuku was the emperor. He was involved in every evil and underhanded deed that happened in Japan, though his influence reached much further than that. He had accepted nothing less than perfection from Izuku, even when he was younger and had less control over his quirk. He cultivated and created the perfect successor for his empire in Izuku, imparting all his wisdom and manipulative ways to the boy, expecting great things from him. And Izuku hated every minute of it. He was a puppet on a string, bowing to the every whim of his puppeteer. His path in life was clear-cut and power-filled, every decision made for him. His every waking moment was spent preparing for his inevitable future, his will non-existent. When the opportunity had arisen for him to escape, he had gladly fled, and ended up in the kings. He had hidden in plain sight, putting his skills to work for the kings, biding his time and growing stronger. So when he had scathingly informed the empty room that Ryo was an idiot for not background checking his people, like come on dude you're practically begging for a coup or infiltration, he was justified in saying it. After all, wasn't it the same thing Izuku had done? After a few more hours, interspersed with various analysis about the kings given in a wheedling tone that promised more if he was let out, Izuku achieved his first goal, get Ryo back into the room with him. Izuku figured that it was about halfway through his second day in captivity, giving him plenty of time to do what he needed to do, when the doors flew open. Ryo stormed into the arena, accompanied only by his right hand, a man by the name of Tsuburaba with a quirk called Anchor that allowed him to increase the gravity in any one direction on anything for up to 5 minutes. The quirk took effect on Izuku as they entered, Izuku's body trying its hardest to meld to the wall he was hung against. A begrudging respect filled him. Tsuburaba was one of the more tolerable people in the gang, the man possessing both an iron control over his quirk and his mind. He was quick as a whip, not just strong, and that was almost enough to make Izuku like the man, if he hadn't been so needlessly cruel. It was a smart move on his part to further immobilize Izuku, though futile if Izuku decided not to play along. Ryo stood before him with a self-satisfied smirk on his face, the scratches Izuku had imposed upon him having been healed into silvery scars already, his foot tapping lightly in the sand. Izuku idly realized he was wearing the same steel-toed boots he always wore when kicking the sheet out of him. "I knew you would come around," the man mused, gesturing up to the camera above the door as if Izuku hadn't noticed it. "You had quite a few things to say, little lion." An involuntary shiver ran down Izuku's spine at the nickname that seemed to follow him no matter where he went. He just ignored it, letting his chin lower slightly as if involuntary, Ryo's eyes lighting up at the show of deference. He took a few paces closer to Izuku. "That's the only reason why I put up with your less-than-stellar attitude. That brain of yours is something else." Ryo's eyes darkened as he leaned in closer to Izuku, the boy unable to move with Tsuburaba's quirk still in effect. "But that won't be enough this time." Izuku allowed a bit of desperation to bleed into his voice. "Ryo, I'm sorry. I was just wound up from the fight, you know how I get." After Izuku had told the pro-heroes in the arena to stay put, he had swung back up into the main viewing box that Ryo and his cronies were in. Ryo had stepped forwards to congratulate Izuku on a well-done fight, and Izuku had attacked him. He had slashed the man across the face and leapt around the people who had surged towards their boss aide. He met the heroes downstairs and they ran. Although Izuku had ran his mouth to Ryo in the past, this was the first time he had physically attacked the man. He inwardly winced. While it had felt good to sink his claws into the man's face, it wasn't his best plan. "Sorry's not gonna cut it this time, little lion," Ryo said. "I'm going to need something a little more substantial." Izuku frantically nodded his head, letting a smile spread across his face as he stared at the man. "Anything." Ryo's own smile grew even larger, motioning to Tsuburaba. The man stepped forwards, releasing his quirk and unlocking Izuku's chains. He fell to the ground, his arms and legs screaming from the sudden change in position. His vision was invaded with a pair of boots. "Lick them," Ryo commanded simply, making Izuku's head snapped up. The man had a self-satisfied smirk on his face, mirth dancing in his eyes. "Shift and lick my boots." Anger flooded up in Izuku so fast and loud that he had to close his eyes to stop himself from lunging at the man. He took a shuddering breath, activating his quirk. His skin crawled and his bones ached for a moment, a stark difference to the roaring pain that had come when he had shifted for the first time. A roaring indignation filled him as his instincts and morals shifted from more human-less animal to more animal-less human. Who did Ryo think he was? He had no idea what Izuku's real power was. He was only alive because Izuku allowed it. The puny human had no place to look down on Izuku. Izuku shook his now large and furry head, tamping the animalistic indignation down as he reopened his eyes. His vision was sharper, blues and greens more pronounced, but his field of view slightly more limited. His nose twitched as his sense of smell drastically increased, now easily able to smell the previous meals the two men had partaken in. The boots once again grew closer, Ryo eyeing him meaningfully. Izuku felt his lips pull back and the semblance of a snarl start deep in his chest before he was abruptly pulled closer to the ground as Tsuburaba once again activated his quirk. He took a deep breath, shuffling forwards to lower his head closer to the boots. His large tongue flicked out, dragging over the stiff leather for a few swipes, then moving to the other. He shuffled backwards, shifting to his favored human-lion hybrid form, the taste of filth lingering in his mouth. He stayed crouched on the ground, hitting his pant legs in humiliation, head bowed and brimming with rage. "Good kitty," Ryo praised him, placing a boot on his chest and pushing backwards. Izuku's back hit the ground without much resistance. Ryo applied more pressure, leaning over him and sneering. "Pull a stunt like that again and I'll kill you," he hissed. "Understood." Izuku lowered his gaze to Ryo's boots. There were large scars in the leather, his lion's tongue made for stripping the meat from bones, not polishing boots. Satisfaction filled him at the sight. "Yes, sir." Of course, that didn't mean that Izuku was back in Ryo's good books. The man kept Izuku closer than he had before, ordering Izuku around as if the boy were his butler. Izuku remained unfailingly docile, fawning and catering to Ryo's every whim. He kept an internal countdown as the hours ticked by, his freedom so tantalizing close that he could almost taste it. Then, just as hour number 77 passed, the lights flickered and cut out. Ryo's radio crackled to life, frantic shouting and unintelligible words filling the air before abruptly cutting off. A different voice replaced it. "Kishi Ryo, this is Pro Hero Eraserhead. Heroes from the Put Your Hands Up agency and the Muzutafu Police Department have your compound surrounded and your power cut. You have 10 minutes for you and all your men to gather in the arena, unarmed and on your knees. Don't make me come in after you." Ryo shouted and cursed, chucking his radio across the room, making it shatter against the wall. Izuku remained quiet at the table, eyes downcast to avoid laughing at the fit Ryo was casting. "What do you want to do, boss?" Tsuburaba asked. There were 5 people in the room: Ryo, Tsuburaba, Izuku, and 2 other henchmen that Izuku had never bothered to learn the names of. They looked around blindly, Izuku's lion-like eyes easily allowing him to see in the dark. He stood before anyone could respond, cracking his neck and stretching his arms out. "There's really only one option, isn't there?" He questioned rhetorically, making all eyes turn towards the sound of his voice. "You have a plan?" Ryo demanded, fumbling through the room towards Izuku. "Who am I kidding? Of course you do. Get us out of here, little lion." Izuku chuckled low and dark. "Us? No, only one person is getting out of this room alive, and that's me." The last word was a broken snarl as Izuku shifted into a full lion, now incapable of human speech. The fight, if you could even call it that, was over in seconds. Tsuburaba was the first to go, his quirk one of the most dangerous. The other henchmen were quickly dispatched, Izuku scoffing at their sloppy actions that just put them in the way of the others. A graceful leap off of a wall landed Izuku on Ryo's chest, a mirror image of the 2 of them earlier. He growled, revealing one of his trump cards. "Pathetic," he hissed into Ryo's mind, the man gasping as he trembled undertone hint of Izuku's razor-sharp claws. "What dash?" Ryo stuttered, cut off with a wheeze by Izuku leaning down further on his chest, fangs dripping right in front of his face. "What?" Izuku mocked the man, huffing in his face. "You didn't think I showed you all my party tricks, did you?" Anger clouded Ryo's face, but Izuku took no mind of it, shuffling off of his chest but staying crouched low to the ground. "Stand up," he commanded, Ryo stumbling to his feet, his ribs no doubt at least cracked from Izuku's weight. As soon as his feet were under him, the man lunged in Izuku's general direction, the lion easily dodging. "Too slow," he sang, his body humming in anticipation as he dodged another clumsily strike, this time from a knife. Ryo's quirk was called Tag, and it allowed him to tag up to 5 inanimate objects that he could then summon to him. Rather useful for a gangster who may or may not be arrested at any point in time. Ryo was fighting, figuratively and literally, in the dark, only following Izuku by the humored chuffs he let out each time the man missed. "Show yourself!" Ryo roared, swiping uselessly at the air around him. "Fight like a man!" Izuku's blood boiled and he once again pounced on Ryo, his front 2 paws holding down each of the man's shoulders, this time allowing his claws to sink into the man's flesh. He gulped down a breath of air and roared directly in Ryo's face. Outside of the large compound that housed the kings, Aizawa's head perked up at the fading roar. "It's close enough to 10 minutes, he said, adjusting his capture scarf and walking towards the main entrance to the arena. "Let's move." They stormed the arena, quickly subduing the various gang members that were running around. Aizawa only gave them the consideration it took to knock them out, Miruko and Hizashi following him as he ran through the halls that were illuminated by their headlamps. "Come on, kid," he thought. "Where are you?" He got his answer as a door down the hall from them slammed open, a small body staggering out. Aizawa skidded to a stop, their lights training on the body. His head snapped up, eyes flashing and his stance lowering as a growl rumbled up through his body. He stopped abruptly. "Eraserhead." Izuku chirruped, seemingly relaxing as his eyes scanned the 3 heroes. "I knew you would come." "Oh God," Hizashi murmured, making Aizawa look in his direction. He followed the blonde's line of sight into the room Izuku had just emerged out of. Their lights only revealed a part of the room, but it was enough to expose the body of a man laying on the ground. His head turned and features froze in horror towards the door. Aizawa's mouth grew dry as he took in the scene. He looks like he was mauled by an animal. His eyes turned back to Izuku, who had his hands shoved in his pockets and an unassuming smile on his face. "Kid, what did you do?" Izuku's expression darkened slightly before he shrugged, baring his teeth at the trio. "Ryo wanted to treat me like an animal, so I was just acting accordingly. Everyone knows that wild animals are unpredictable. His words caused Aizawa to take notice of the blood smeared across his face and clothes, an echo to how he looked last time Aizawa saw him. For a lack of a better idea, Aizawa simply nodded. "Let's get you out of here, kid." Sometime later, Izuku was waiting in a small interrogation room, Tsukachi unable to ignore his ties to the kings despite Aizawa and Hizashi's best protests. Miruko had remained uncharacteristically silent through it all. The three heroes stood on the other side of the one-way glass, watching as the boy rested his head on the table, apparently asleep. "Are you okay?" Hizashi asked, turning to Miruko. The woman paused before shrugging, her own tail twitching slightly. "My quirk is pretty great," she started, voice low. "It lets me do my job and I love it. But it also makes me more sensitive to animalistic urges. Rabbits are inherently prey animals and I've had to work hard to overcome that." "That boy," she trailed off, staring at Izuku in thought. A few moments later she shook herself out of it, continuing on, voice stronger. "He activates that prey instinct. He's overwhelmingly, wholly, a predator." At that moment Tsukachi approached. He dipped his head at the heroine in thanks. "Thank you for your assistance in this, Miruko. I know it was less action-filled than you're used to, but you were still a big help." She laughed boisterously, slapping the man on his shoulder on the way past. "I have to leave some but for the rest of you to kick," she exclaimed, walking out, only a wary glance cast over her shoulder. Tsukachi approached the remaining two heroes at the glass. "Because he's still a minor, I need someone certified in the room while I talk to him," he said, glancing at the two. "Which one of you wants to do it?" Hizashi patted his husband's shoulder, the two having already discussed that. "I will," Aizawa told Tsukachi. The man nodded, walking towards the door with Aizawa following him. It opened and the two sat on the opposite side of the table from Izuku, his eyes bright and clear, a sign that he was just feigning sleep earlier. "Hello, Midoriya," Tsukachi started, smiling gently at the boy. His tail twitched in return. "I prefer Izuku, Detective Tsukachi." To his credit, the man only blinked once in surprise. "I guess I really shouldn't be surprised that you know who I am." Izuku shrugged, a favorite action of his as Aizawa was coming to find. "I had to make sure the information that I gathered would be put to use, and not just discredited. You have a history of working closely with criminal informants, so I took a leap of faith." Tsukachi nodded, rearranging some papers in front of them. "Well, with that settled, I just have a few general questions to ask you. Your full name is Midoriya Izuku, correct?" The boy gave a verbal affirmative. "You lived with both your parents till you were 10, correct?" An affirmative once again, though Aizawa saw Izuku's ear twitch on top of his head. "Interesting. Can you explain your quirk to us?" Izuku tensed. "No," that made both men pause as they stared at the boy, who had been cooperative thus far. "No," Aizawa ventured, watching as the boy tapped his fingers on the table. "I want to," he started, obviously frustrated. "But I can't." "Why not?" the detective asked. In response, Izuku pulled down the collar of his shirt. Aizawa looked past the scars there that created a pit in his stomach, focusing on the three black, interlocking rings of what appeared to be a tattoo. Izuku released his shirt and started speaking. "There is a quirk in this world," he said, each word carefully weighed before being spoken, "that can create a contract with the user or between other people. The number of rings signifies the number of people involved in your contract. Mine is me and two others. The terms can vary, but the outcome is the same. Break the terms of your contract or attempt to nullify it without the original contractor, and you die." He spoke casually about the contract that he was apparently stuck in, and the terms of it. The two men exchanged a glance. "Well, that certainly threw a wrench in their plans. What can you tell us?" Tsukachi asked, his voice laced with frustration. Izuku smiled. "Undoubtedly you looked into my past, and saw that I disappeared when this contract came about during that time, before I was with the kings. I can still testify about them, don't worry." Izuku scratched his chin, thinking. "I can tell you that I am the person known as Midoriya Izuku and my mother's name is Inko. I grew up in Mizudafu. I have a shifting quirk. Currently it's like a scale, more human to more animal, or somewhere in between. His wording was funny, but Aizawa ignored that in favor of another thought. More animal? Not more lion? Izuku nodded. I can change into any animal I want. The lion is just my favorite because it was my first. His eyebrows lowered in concentration. Slowly, the ears on top of his head and the tail waving behind him disappeared as he became fully human for a moment before bouncing back. Not only is it the physical attributes, but the mental ones as well. I always remain human, but certain features become more pronounced depending on what animal I emulate. Foxes are mischievous, lions prideful, birds twitchy, snakes sly, etc., etc. Oh, he added as an afterthought. I can communicate telepathically but only when fully animal. It would be kind of useless if I couldn't talk to anyone. Tsukachi let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a quirk. Izuku preened, obviously pleased with the praise. Of course, he said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It's mine. How did you come to be contracted? Izuku was silent for a moment as he thought. There are powers at work in this world that you can't even begin to comprehend, he said quietly, as if afraid of his own words. They tend to keep those who are privy to certain information on a tight leash. Aizawa shifted uncomfortably in his chair at Izuku's admission. Are you in danger? Izuku grinned, a touch of something feral in it. Oh, most certainly. There were so many things wrong in the moment that Aizawa chose not to pursue, instead moving back towards the original line of questioning. Are you a danger to those around you? He questioned, voice even. Izuku's eyes flashed as his ears flattened to his head. No. He vehemently denied. There's a reason that I was with the kings. He ran a tongue over his slightly protruding fangs, which were really just sharper and slightly longer canines, as the air around him seemed to take on a different pressure. There's only one person that I have ill intent towards, and I will right the wrongs of the past. Even if it kills me. Despite his cryptic words, the force behind them was unmistakable. It made Aizawa shiver. Okay. Tsukachi muttered. You certainly have some special circumstances. I need to discuss with the higher-ups how to continue, so we need to decide what's done with you in the meantime. Izuku snorted slightly. A jail? I am a criminal? Tsukachi eyed him sharply. Were you under duress or the threat of violence when committing those criminal acts? It was Izuku's turn to shift in his seat. What the yes but dash? Tsukachi slammed the folder shut, smiling at the boy. So there you have it. Seeing as you are a material witness in an ongoing investigation, the standard would be to place you in witness protection. However, your current circumstances and unknown past make that slightly difficult. Therefore, I'm recommending an around-the-clock, hero surveillance detail in addition to mental and emotional observations in a natural setting. Izuku was clearly confused. So, house arrest? Aizawa hid a grin in his capture weapon at Izuku's confusion, only having slightly forgot that this was a child in front of him, despite Izuku's demeanor and past experiences. No adoption. Izuku liked to consider himself to be an intuitive person. He could read the room like he could read a book, and very few things took him by surprise anymore. Aizawa Shota seemed to be the cause of most of those things, surprisingly enough. He blinked once, twice, at the man's admission, the word uttered in a self-satisfied tone of voice. Adoption? He repeated, slowly, glancing between the two men in front of him, mind racing a mile a minute. His words came just as fast, his mumbling one of his few traits he had never been able to shake. But that would mean a pro-hero, probably a couple, so there are more hands to help. They would also need to be certified and powerful enough to qualify as witness protection, so at least the top 50 I'd say, maybe even, but there really aren't that many married pro-heroes, just a few. They would have to know my circumstances. He trailed off, looking up, eyes darting from Aizawa to the one-way glass, already sensing another person beyond it. It's you, isn't it? His voice was flat, his default for when his emotions were too much for him to sort through at the moment. Aizawa nodded, the tilt of his mouth suggesting that he was mildly impressed. Good job. My husband and I have volunteered to shelter you for the time being. We already have a son, Hitoshi, about your age. We're both teachers at UA, and UA has been approved as a safe house of sorts for you. Simply put, you'll be staying with us and attending UA as a student. Izuku sat back in his chair, tilting his head back as he looked at the ceiling, absent-mindedly scratching stomach. This could work. It was preferable over a dinky jail cell. He would have the freedom to maneuver as he wished, as well as access to information that he otherwise wouldn't. All he would have to do was play nice with the other kids. He looked back down, giving a sharp-toothed smile to the men. Sign me up. Tsukachi closed his folder, smiling kindly at Izuku. Then it's settled. I'll go start the paperwork, and in the meantime you can become acquainted with your hosts. He walked out, a blond man walking in to replace him. Izuku easily recognized him as Present Mike, Hisashi Yamada, only slightly surprised that the loud man married the quiet man. Opposites attract, I guess, he thought, returning the voice hero's smile. Hey! He cheered, jovially sitting down and leaning towards Izuku. Good to finally meet you, Izuku. Sho talked quite a bit about you. Izuku leaned forward slightly, mirroring the hero's position. He raised an eyebrow at the other hero. Oh really? You've only talked to me twice, Aizawa. Hisashi smacked the table, pointing at Izuku. Exactly my point. We don't know you. Obviously there are things you can't talk about, and we'll figure out a way around that eventually, but tell us about yourself. What's your favorite color? As his husband questioned Izuku, the boy answering amusedly, Aizawa pulled out his phone. There were a few messages, one from Nedzu, the principal somehow already knowing about Izuku's circumstances and having taken the liberty to inform the teachers' group chat, who had all reacted about as well as could be expected, and send him enrollment paperwork. There was one from Hitoshi, informing him that he was home from school and that the supplies Aizawa had ordered for the new kitten had arrived, accompanied by a picture of it stacked against the wall. Finally, from Hisashi, his running commentary all throughout the interrogation, with an unnecessary amount of emojis. He put the device away, actively tuning back into the conversation. Katsudan, Izuku was saying with a dreamy look on his face. My mom used to make the best. But I like spicy food too. The boy had relaxed slightly, and Aizawa could see that his walls weren't as high as they were earlier. Of course, Aizawa mused. I would be nervous too if one wrong word could literally kill me. It sounds like your mother was a wonderful lady, Hisashi said gently, cluing Aizawa into the fact that this wasn't the first time the woman was mentioned. She was. Izuku replied just as softly. Accidents are never fair, Aizawa butted in, referencing the apartment fire that had killed her. The report had said that a neighbor, who somehow survived, had left a candle burning too close to their traps. Izuku looked at him sharply. It wasn't an accident. They were interrupted by Tsukachi returning, waving a stack of papers in his hand. We just need some signatures and then everyone's good to go. Izuku shoved his chair back, standing up and stretching before shoving his hands in the hoodie he had been given from the lost and found box, clearly signaling the end of that line of questioning. Aizawa and Hisashi shared a look behind his back as they followed the boy out. This would definitely be the topic of a conversation later. It was a whirlwind of paperwork as the trio tried to escape. Even Hisashi's normally cheerful attitude was becoming slightly strained before they were eventually released into the late afternoon sun. Thankfully, they had chosen to drive there the day or so before when preparing for the raid, allowing them to make their way back to the apartment without having to fight the sidewalk and train traffic. They lived on the 4th floor of a nondescript complex, a short train ride from both UA and Hisashi's agency, in a decently quiet part of town. As they approached, Aizawa noticed the boy becoming more and more pensive, his answers to Hisashi's ongoing chatter becoming few and far between. His face was apprehensive as he looked up at the building, though he was clearly trying to appear indifferent. It almost would have worked if Aizawa wasn't already adept at reading teenagers, which was a burden really. They rode up the elevator, Hisashi having moved from what it would be like at UA for Izuku to what Hitoshi was like, assuring the now silent boy that the two would get along great. He loves cats, Hisashi gushed, unlocking the door and stepping inside, Aizawa following him. It's cute. The two men began to shuck off their shoes, Aizawa glancing up and seeing Izuku still standing just shy of the doorway. He was frozen, not even his tail waving, staring slightly past them. Slowly, his face contorted into anger. Rio may have been a bee, he spat, tail suddenly lashing in the air behind him as his ears lowered close to his head. But at least he let me live like a human. Aizawa followed the boy's gaze, landing on the new things that he had ordered for a cat. And then it clicked. He could shift into an animal at will. Hizashi had said that Hitoshi loved cats. They had new equipment to take care of an additional animal just waiting for them as they got home. Izuku must have thought they were going to force him to be an animal, a pet, not a human. Curses fell from his mouth as he turned back towards the door, just in time to catch the end of Izuku's tail disappearing from sight. Aizawa slid out into the hall, capture weapon floating at the ready, but he was too late. Izuku jumped through the window at the end of the hall, glass shattering outwards, form blurring and shifting into something with wings. By the time Aizawa had slid to a stop at the broken window, hands clutching desperately at the frame, broken glass digging into his palms, Izuku was gone. Anger fueled Izuku's every wing stroke as he fled through the sky, curses pouring from his beak in the form of irritated chitters. He focused on the anger he felt, letting it overpower the small kernel of disappointment wound tightly in his gut. He had really thought that the two heroes would be different. All adults are the same, he thought darkly. Threatened by the unknown and things out of their control. He squawked as loudly as he could, in place of a proper scream of frustration, startling some starlings that were riding the same updraft as him. At the small bird's reactions he took stock of his own body, tilting his head back to survey himself, which did little to help, seeing as he had to focus on where he was going. He tilted towards the ground, still well within the city, the light fading fast. He landed, hopping slightly, on the ground in front of a shiny car. He peered at the distorted reflection, shifting his body to get a better look at himself. As he had jumped from the window, he didn't give much thought to anything besides wings. At first glance, he thought he was a falcon. But then he saw the lack of a notch on his beak, as well as his above-average size, leading him to the conclusion of a hawk. He wasn't very surprised. His transformations tended to lean more towards the predator side of the animal kingdom. Loud yelling drew his attention, and he barely hopped out of the way of a boot-clad foot being swung in his direction, it clipping his wing. He hopped backwards, wings fluttering as he let out a sound of indignation. "Don't scratch up my car, you flea hotel!" A man yelled at him, kicking at him once more. Izuku took to the skies, diving bombing the man several times before screeching at him and flying away. His body lagged, wing beats faltering as he sought a warm wind to ride, a dull ache spreading from where the boot had connected. Luckily, nothing was broken and Izuku could still fly, but he would have rather not have boots hit him, thank you very much. He was also really regretting not taking a nap at the jail when he had the chance. Rio had barely let him snatch a few hours of sleep before interrupting him for something minuscule, and he couldn't use his quirk to bolster his energy, so he was exhausted. He rode the wind out of the city, his senses being filled with something undoubtedly nature, yet still civilized. It was well and truly dark as he fluttered down into a tree. He puffed out his feathers, shifting from foot to foot as he sought out something more comfortable. His hawk brain screeched in indignation at not having a proper nest, but Izuku was entirely too tired to care. He quelled it, shifting on the branch once again to obtain maximum comfort, and drifting tiredly off to sleep. It seemed like his eyes had barely shut before they were flying open in alarm. However, the bright yellow sunlight that filtered into his vision, making him blink several times, told him that he had slept through the night. His wing was stiff, but movable, leaving him cursing the man in his mind. He peered down the trunk of the tree at what had been the cause of his rude awakening. There stood 3 teens, each wearing the same uniform, one with red hair, one entirely too pink, and one with yellow hair and a black bolt in it. They were gesturing up at him, voices rising excitedly. "Here, birdie, birdie, birdie. Pretty bird," the yellow-haired boy called, making Izuku huff and shift so they couldn't see him anymore. "Ah man!" There was a pained exclamation, making him peer back out once again. The pink girl had shoved her elbow into his side, and was now lecturing him. "Kaminari. It's a wild animal, not a pet. You can't just birdie birdie." The redhead scratched behind his ear in thought. Still, it is pretty cool. I wonder if we could get Koda over here after training to talk to it. He glanced back over his shoulder, face paling drastically. Speaking of training, we need to go. Sensei's coming. They scampered off, leaving Izuku in peace once again. He settled against the trunk of the tree, making a list of things he would need to do in the near future. Luckily, he had stashed a go bag when things began to look down for the kings in a park somewhere in Mizudafu, so his first option would be to get that. He could probably find somewhere to squat for a bit as he got his finances in order, and he would need to find a good forger who could make him some papers so he could get a job. He could always go back to pickpocketing like he had been before he joined the kings, but that would draw too much attention to him. He was startled from his thoughts by a familiar sound, and he tilted his head towards the sound. He could just barely make out yelling, accompanied by the faint sound of explosions that he would know anywhere. Desperation filled him as he spread his wings, flapping towards the sound of voices and the small group of people in the distance, pain forgotten. His eyes sought out a familiar blonde, fondness filling him as he found the explosion of spiky hair. He dived towards the group, folding his wings back against his body. There were shouts as he flared them, wing bones aching from the pressure of slowing his descent, his stunt not doing any favors for his already injured wing. He paid all of that no mind, weaving through the bodies towards his long-lost friend. Kaken! He cried out in joy, the blonde whirling around, red eyes wide. Izuku shifted into his lion form, one that the other boy was more than familiar with, the lack of wings making him shoot towards the other boy as well as the ground. As he had so many times in the past, he crashed into the other body. But this time, his claws stayed firmly sheathed and one of his paws curled as well as it could around the back of the other's head. They slammed into the ground, Izuku careful not to put his entire weight onto the other boy, it jarring what was now his hurt shoulder, but he couldn't care less. He leaned down, rubbing his head all over the blonde's face, the low rumbling growl in his chest as close to a purr as he could come. Kaken, Kaken, Kaken. He chanted, projecting his thoughts. Hands caught the side of his face, pulling him away far enough that the blonde could look at him properly. Izuku! He whispered, making the boy in question let out a loud, yet harmless, yowl of approval. The others, however, clearly didn't think so. Bakugu! Several voices cried out, making Izuku look over his shoulder. They were being crowded from all sides, quirks that he had no idea what they did clearly activated. Izuku let out a loud warning growl, crouching low over his friend as his head swung around, trying and failing to keep all the approaching people in his sights. One, the redhead from earlier, got too close for his comfort. He hissed, baring his teeth and swiping his paw at the boy. The sounds got louder, his ears twitching in disapproval and flattening to his head. There were names and commands being shouted, the boy beneath him silent in shock, but one won out over the rest. Izuku! Came the disbelieving question, and he met the eyes of Aizawa. He pressed closer to Kaken, confused but determined to protect him, baring his teeth at the man he had just escaped from. His animal instincts were dialed to 9, everything around him presenting as a threat to him and one of the few remaining members of his family, his pride. Aizawa's eyes flared red, trained on him. He felt his quirk being stripped away, leaving him in his human form, crouched on all fours. There were gasps, yet he still bared his teeth and snarled as well as he could. Something shifted behind him, and he reacted a second too late. Hands wrapped around his arms and shoulders, pulling him away from Kaken. He struggled, tossing his head and wrenching his body around, spitting curses and threats. His voice seemed to snap Kaken out of whatever stupor he was in, the blonde scrambling up and lunging for him, his palms crackling. "Don't touch him!" He roared, people shouting once again as they surged towards him. Izuku got a hand free, reaching towards him. "Kaken!" He yelled, struggling in vain as he saw his friend being restrained forcefully, instincts haywire at all the perceived danger around him. He saw red eyes widen, a hand desperately trying to cover his nose as a pink gas seeped around them. He was too late, his head lolling back as he slumped to the ground lifelessly. Izuku roared painfully at the sight, his quirk still unreachable, nearly choking on the pink gas that engulfed him. Then, nothing. Quiet voices around him were the first thing that Izuku became aware of, his head fuzzed by a deep sleep that he hadn't had in a long time. He gave a soft sigh, snuggling deeper into the pillows around him. Just as he was about to drift off again, his memories came rushing back. His eyes snapped open, quickly adjusting to the light as he sat up and took stock of the room he was in. It was clearly an infirmary, Izuku and Kaken occupying the two beds closest to the window and furthest from the door. Relief filled him as he saw Kaken sitting up on his bed, scowling, but alive and talking to someone. That relief was gone as he saw a group of mostly unfamiliar people surrounding his friend, Aizawa, scowling at the boy in the forefront. Once again he reacted on instinct. His hand snapped out, grabbing Kaken by the arm. In a startling show of strength, he ripped the boy off of the bed, and onto the other side of his own. He crowded him up against the wall, placing himself in front of him and between the people he had categorized as threats. His quirk arose with barely any prompting, fur sprouting and body shifting as he once again became a lion, shoulder now noticeably absent of pain. He pawed at the ground, opening his mouth wide and letting loose a roar. He gnashed his teeth in the stunned adult's direction, widening his stance and eyeing them warily, a low rumbling beginning in his chest. He wouldn't lose this time. There was silence for a few moments before a chuckling laughter sounded, the adults shifting to allow a much smaller figure to come to the front. It appeared to be some sort of rodent in a suit, and Izuku dubbed it a chimera for lack of better terms. It came several paces closer, until the rumbling in Izuku's chest grew louder and he liked his chops meaningfully. They told me that you are rather fierce, but this really is beyond my wildest imaginations. It chirped gleefully, bowing slightly at the waist. I am Principal Nedzu of UA. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Midoriya Izuku. The principal waited, obviously expecting a response. Just Izuku, he projected to the entire room, rather reluctantly, his voice low and angry. His only consolation was the fact that several eyebrows were raised at his voice. The principal wasn't daunted, only seeming more pleased. Would you like some tea? He offered, making Izuku snort and draw his lips back to show his teeth. What I would like is to leave. The last word was as close to a growl as he could get, making the boy he still had behind him thump his hands down on Izuku's flank, voice angry. Leave? Zuzu, I just found you again. You're not going anywhere till I get some answers, you daft bastard. Izuku tilted his head slightly, giving Kaken a baleful look. You're coming with me, you stupid idiot. I wouldn't let you stay here with animal abusers and enslavers. He cast his gaze back forwards and hissed his displeasure at the two heroes who had attempted to force him into the life of a cat, only restrained from pouncing on them by his need to stay by Kaken's side. The principal hummed in response. Yes, I heard about the misunderstanding at the Yamazawa apartment. I assure you that they had no intentions of forcing you to live as anything beyond what you were most comfortable with. Izuku chuffed in amusement, stalking back and forth in front of Kaken, tail lashing angrily. Misunderstanding? I saw their supplies with my own two eyes. Hizashi as good as told me I would be their pet. I am loath to believe in that many coincidences, Nedzu. The chimera spread his hands, smiled genial. And yet, that is what happened. He paused, Izuku recognizing it as something to emphasize his next words. They hardly needed it. After all, I doubt All Might would let something as abhorrent as that happen. Izuku pet his head, studying the group of people behind the principal, lifting his head and scenting the air. There was Aizawa, as blank as ever, and Hizashi, who looked noticeably cowed. A dark-haired woman, who smelled faintly of the gas that had knocked him out earlier. A tall skeleton of a man, who looked one gust of wind away from keeling over dead. What appeared, and smelled, to be a humanoid piece of concrete and a bloody-smelling, vampire-esque man completed the group. He looked back towards Kaken, who rolled his eyes but pointed out the man who was apparently All Might. Skeletor, he said, referencing the pre-Quark-era show He-Man the two liked to watch as kids. Izuku snorted softly, grabbing Kaken's uniform gently between his teeth, dragging the cursing boy behind him as he stepped up to the taller blonde. The man, despite his appearance, stood firm facing Izuku. Izuku released his grip on Kaken's uniform, the boy not needing any instructions to press close to his side, despite his continued protests and curses, a reassuring warmth in the midst of the group of adults. He eyed All Might. The man was tall and skinny, gaunt in all the wrong places and accompanied by the faint smell of blood that had Izuku wrinkling his nose. In his lion form, Izuku was as large as a full-grown wild lion, a little over 120 centimeters tall, and he knew that he would grow bigger, yet he still only reached the man's navel. He tensed slightly but shifted into his favored in-between form, stepping closer to Kaken. He peered up at the slightly taller boy. Are they telling the truth? Kaken nodded without hesitation. The fucker really is All Might. He's changed a bit since we were kids. Izuku nodded, steadily avoiding the gaze of Aizawa and Hisashi. Instead, he found Nedzu, still set slightly apart from the group. For the first time since waking, he left Kaken's side, crouching in front of the chimera. He placed a hand on the principal's head, pressing slightly harder than necessary, flexing his hands and letting his fingernails lengthen slightly. They were nowhere near as sharp as his claws, but were still enough to cause the chimera to wince slightly. Lions eat rats, he said, voice soft but caring. He could feel the people behind him tensing, but he ignored them. Don't make me regret this. He stood, returning to Kaken's side, warily eyeing the people around him. Let's talk. There was a buzzing in Katsuki's head. It had begun the moment he first heard that childish nickname, something he had given up hope on ever hearing again, and had only grown stronger the longer he was around Deku. It was as if his memories with the boy were all rushing to the front of his mind, but something with them was. His time spent knocked out by Midnight's quirk was filled with dappled sunlight, races through the forest, and a childish chant about the agency Bu. But he saw those memories through a fog, almost like they had been obscured, tilted slightly. There was a disconnect between them. In one hazy memory, Deku tripped and broke his wrist, eyes blowing wide and filling with tears, but in the next he was fine. No cast, no visit to the hospital, and Katsuki was sure he would remember it because the nerd would prattle on for hours about any new quirk he saw. Just the two boys and some faceless extras traipsing around the neighborhood. Katsuki was sure there was something he was missing, a niggling in the back of his mind yelling at him to figure it out. He watched as Deku reluctantly agreed to talk to his teachers, realizing that it was now or never that he would get answers. His hand darted out, gripping the other boy's wrist tightly. Bathroom, he muttered, dragging Deku down the hall, quick enough that they heard no protests. He barged into the bathroom, locking the door behind them, kicking down stall doors to ensure they were alone. Finally he turned, and they studied each other for a quiet moment. His friend had grown, his eyes still wide but no longer holding the childlike innocence he remembered. He was tall and built for power, but Katsuki was taller and built for speed. A tentative smile crossed Deku's face, so familiar and yet so different, and he came a step closer. I missed you, Kaken. The buzzing spread from his head to the rest of his body, screaming at him. He shook his head in irritation and Deku took a step closer. You're remembering, aren't you? Katsuki shook his head in irritation. What the hell is happening? Deku held his hands out in front of him, eyeing him warily. What do you remember from the last day you saw me? Katsuki stilled, shoulders slumping slightly. Your dad called you home while we were in the middle of a game, and then I never saw you again. His eyebrows furrowed, looking up at the other boy in an anger born of confusion. But that's not what happened, is it? Deku shook his head. Try to remember. My dad called me, but what happened after that? What really happened? Katsuki's eyes widened, the buzzing stopped, and his vision flickered. Katsuki scoffed and kicked the ground, waiting impatiently for Izuku to return from his phone conversation with his dad. The rest of their neighborhood gang congregated around them, chattering aimlessly, but Katsuki's eyes were fixed on the tense shoulders of his best friend. Unbidden, the words he had overheard after his auntie's funeral rose to the front of his mind. He's always been a little unhinged, Katsuki's mom had said to his dad about Izuku's dad, unaware that Katsuki was listening. I'm worried about how he's going to treat Izuku now that Inko isn't here to reel him in. Katsuki scoffed and kicked the ground once more. Nobody needed to protect the nerd, he could do that just fine with his crazy overpowered quirk, but with Katsuki by his side? There was nothing the two of them couldn't do. He was broken out of his thoughts by Izuku jogging over, an apologetic smile on his face. "Sorry guys," he said, only Katsuki noticing the way his eyes were too tight to be natural, his shoulders slightly hunched over. "I'm gonna have to bail, Dad wants me home early." There were groans and protests from the extras, but a well-placed glare and some crackles from his palms sent them running. "You don't have to be so mean, Kaken." Izuku's voice was disappointed but resigned, as he fell into step beside Katsuki on their way to his rental house, with their apartment having burned down and all. Katsuki eyes him sideways. "How's your dad doing?" Izuku laughed lowly, easily seeing through his question. "Things at home are fine, Kaken, you don't have to worry." Katsuki scoffed, punching the boy. "I'm not worried about you, shitty Deku. But if even half the things you told me about your dad are true, then we need a plan." Izuku tensed almost imperceptibly, grabbing Katsuki's arm to draw them to a stop. "You can't tell anyone about that," he hissed, eyes wide and fearful. "If Dad knows that I told you, there's no telling what he'll do." Izuku released his hold, shoving his hands into his pockets, and they continued walking. "Besides, now that I don't have to worry about Mom, I can figure out something to do to take him down." Katsuki shrugged but let the issue die. They walked in silence the rest of the way to Izuku's house, stopping in front of his door. Izuku gave a small smile. "See you tomorrow, Kaken." Katsuki dipped his head slightly. "Don't get in trouble, Zuzu." Green eyes widened at the nickname, something Katsuki only used when he was being serious, but Izuku nodded nonetheless. He slipped into the yard and through the doors without a backwards glance. Katsuki just stood there, staring at the house. "Come on," he muttered, though he didn't know what he was waiting for. He lingered a few more minutes before growling and walking up to the door. "This is stupid," he muttered, knocking on the door. He would just invite them to dinner and then go home. There was no answer, so he knocked louder, calling out, "Deku!" There was still no answer, so he pushed the door open, stepping softly into the house. He padded forwards, the hair on the back of his neck standing up as he surveyed the near-silent house. He crept forwards, seeing no one, and pausing in front of the stairs leading up. More than likely Izuku was just in his room and his dad was in his study and they didn't hear him knock and everything was fine, he was just overthinking it. Except for the fact that the door leading to the basement was cracked open and it was never open. He hesitated, but reached out a hand and pulled it the rest of the way open, creeping down the stairs. He was rewarded by the soft sound of voices. He reached the bottom of the stairs, peering around the corner to see Izuku cowering before his dad, the man's hand raised threateningly. Katsuki moved without thinking. He swung a hand forwards, palms sparking with explosions and lips parted in a roar. He slammed it into the BSTRD's face, stumbling from the pressure of it, grabbing Izuku's hand and tugging the frozen boy towards the door. "Let's go, Deku!" he shouted, stumbling towards the stairs as his heart raced in his chest. "We need to get out of here and then go to the cops. The cops can help." The door flung shut just as they reached it, held tightly closed by some invisible force. Katsuki turned, placing himself between Izuku and his father, letting his hands crackle and spark in threat. "Don't effing come any closer, you piece of shit." He spat, holding his hands out. "I know your tricks. You have to touch me to take my quirk, ergo no touching." The tall man slowly removed his hands from his face, the skin there blackened and crackling, but already fading into starburst-like scars. The man's lips curled up in a smirk. "For some reason, it doesn't surprise me that you know the truth about my quirk. Do you know about my sons too?" Katsuki clenched his jaw, but his silence was enough of an answer. "Of course you do. You two have always been as close as my brother and I were once upon a time." He pulled a white cloth from his pocket, wiping at the soot left on his face from Katsuki's explosion, revealing the indentation where his eyes should be. Katsuki felt sick. "Tell me, Katsuki, would you like to come with us?" He faltered for just a moment before speaking. "Like hell are you going anywhere but jail?" Izuku's dad nodded, humming slightly. "I thought you might say that." his body blurred, across the room 1 second and then in front of Katsuki the next. He reached out a hand, leering down at him, but a quick shove from his back sent the blonde flying, the man's hand connecting with Izuku's face instead of Katsuki's own. The boy's body tensed and he curved backwards, whites of his eyes showing in pain. His dad stumbled back, shaking his hand out slightly. "Brat," he growled before relaxing and giving a small shrug. "Very well. If you won't come with us, then I guess I'll just have to kill you." He reached towards Katsuki once again, and Katsuki felt his breath seize in his chest, his lungs bound by iron as he struggled to breath. "No!" Izuku cried out, barreling into his father's side, the man taken by surprise. They tumbled to the ground, but were quickly righted, Izuku hanging in the air immobilized by a quirk. "Learn your place, boy," Hisashi thundered, ignoring the gasping coming from both boys. He smoothed his suit down, waving a hand and letting them breath but not move. "I'll do anything," Izuku sobbed, tears streaming down his face in a familiar scene. "Just don't hurt Kaken." Hisashi paused, tilting his head slightly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Anything." Izuku nodded desperately, ignoring Katsuki's cursing at him. Another wave of Hisashi's hand allowed the two of them to move, Katsuki crowding up in Izuku's space once more. "Don't," he pleaded, completely ignoring Hisashi. "We can take him." Izuku just shook his head, giving him a watery smile. "It'll be okay, Kaken. Trust me." Katsuki hesitated but stepped back, warily eyeing the now silent man. "Contract us," Izuku said. "We won't say a word about you, I swear it." Hisashi nodded once, holding out his hands. A different quirk swirled to life, a red string darting from his hands to Izuku's and Katsuki's chests. There was a sharp burning sensation in his chest and Katsuki pulled at his collar, revealing a black mark, 3 interlocked circles, on his chest where the string had been connected. "What did you do?" he demanded, hands crackling uncontrollably. Hisashi just smirked. "Don't worry, you won't be able to remember long enough to ask questions." Katsuki frowned. "What dash?" He jerked back as Hisashi's form blurred, the sightless man appearing in front of him, laying one finger on his forehead. Katsuki gasped, drawing in a breath as he stumbled to the sink, ripping down the collar of his uniform to expose the 3 circles. "What the F dash?" he breathed out, gently pressing at them. "And I never thought to question this?" He met Izuku's eyes in the mirror. The boy shrugged. "He used a quirk on you that altered your memories, and seeing me was the trigger. He was probably planning on trying to get you to join him again so that I would have someone like his doctor is for him. He just didn't want you blowing any whistles before he was ready." Katsuki nodded slowly, head no longer buzzing but still just as full as he sifted through his new, old, memories. There was a banging on the bathroom door, making the two of them look towards it. Katsuki turned to face Izuku, snatching the boy up and hugging him tightly. "This isn't over," he warned, voice suspiciously thick. Izuku nodded into his chest, hugging him just as tightly. "I'm not going anywhere, Kaken. I promise." Shoyuta resisted the urge to scowl at the room. The normally rowdy bunch of heroes were curiously quiet, none of them making any move to hide their observations of the boys sat at the table in front of them. Granted, it was an odd sight. Bakugo Katsuki, one of the least approachable students of 1A, was practically glued to the side of Midoriya Izuku, who had just threatened an entire room of heroes. They were talking in low tones with heads bowed towards each other, words soft enough to be nothing more than vague sounds, completely ignoring the awkward silence that encapsulated the others in the room. Shoyuta crossed his arms slightly tighter, glaring at the door Nedzu had disappeared through. If the demon rat took any longer to get tea, then Shoyuta would feed him to Izuku himself. "Your anger is misplaced," the voice of his therapist suggested lightly. "Are you angry at Ndizu for taking so long, or are you angry at yourself for even causing this situation to happen?" Shuta's scowl deepened at the imagined words, and he curled up further into himself as the pit of self-pity and disappointment that had been curled tightly around his gut ever since Izuku jumped from the window wound itself tighter. A light touch to his arm brought his attention to the side, his husband studiously not meeting his angry gaze as he tapped a rhythm Shoyuta recognized to be a breathing exercise. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and then opened them, forcibly relaxing himself. A slight nod from the side was all he got, but it made affection bloom in his chest. "Is there something you want to share with the class, boys?" Hizashi questioned slightly jokingly, breaking the oppressive silence. Both heads snapped up to look at him, a familiar and somehow reassuring scowl breaking across Katsuki's face as a sneer bloomed on Izuku's. "Not with you." His words were biting, clearly still distrusting of the heroes despite his agreement with Nedzu to talk. Midnight laughed delightedly. "Oh," she cooed. "Kitty has claws." Izuku reacted in an instant, his pupils expanding and coating his entire eye black, with only a faint golden ring. His ears melted away, his facial features becoming fully human, with a smattering of scales on the high points of his face. His mouth stretched open, wider than it should have been able to go, and as black as tar as he hissed at the room. Short but needle-thin and curved fangs protruded from the top of his mouth, dripping a thick liquid that Shoyuta was wary to touch. The transformation took less than a second, Izuku bearing his new fangs as if it were second nature. The table clattered as several of the occupants pushed themselves backwards, startled by his new, snake-like appearance. A forked tongue flickered out from his smirk, as black as the inside of his mouth. "I it again," he hissed, the sound slightly drawn out. "Sikiti Fangs." A smattering of applause from the doorway drew their attention, Nedzu choosing that moment to re-enter the room, followed by Vlad King toting a tray of tea. "How clever!" the Chimera exclaimed, hopping up into his seat as he waved for the tea to be placed on the table, sliding cups to each member. "A black mamba, I presume?" Izuku's extra features melted away, the boy staying fully human instead of his preferred halfway transformation. It gave Shoyuta the beginning of a realization. "My appearance has more of an effect than my transformation," he said with a shrug, reaching forwards and snagging the cup of tea that Nedzu was pushing towards Yagi. Izuku quickly rearranged the cups, going in such a dizzying circuit that if any of the cups were poisoned, there would be no way for even Nedzu to predict where they ended up. Izuku sat down, giving Katsuki his cup and taking Katsuki's own cup, which had not been switched with the rest. His satisfied nod gave Shoyuta the impression that he knew exactly which cup was intended for which person. He toasted Nedzu sarcastically. "After you." The faux toast was received with grace, Nedzu taking a generous tug from his cup, the level noticeably lower than before. Izuku set his back down, not even bothering to feign drinking from it. Katsuki shook his head with what could only be described as fondness for his friend's games, but followed suit. Shoyuta looked at his own chug before shrugging marginally and sipping it. He had worse things to fear than death. "Now, I agreed to talk, but you most likely know that there are things that I cannot discuss with you." Nedzu nodded, folding his tiny paws. "I have been made aware, and I have taken the liberty to compose a pile of questions that I think you might be able to answer." Izuku waved a hand for him to continue. "The first is this. How do you know when you are speaking on a topic that is forbidden under your contract?" The wording of my contract was rather vague. It allowed more restrictions to be added at a later date. One of the later restrictions was that I physically would not be able to do certain things. For example, he straightened in his chair, head tilted back regally. "If I were to try and tell you that the name of the person I am contracted to is H-," his words were cut off into a strangled groan, his eyes rolling back to expose the whites. His body arched, tensing and trembling slightly. Katsuki jolted, face fearful, hands reaching for his friend. Before they made contact, Izuku relaxed, and would have seemed completely normal were it not for the slight tremors racking his body. "It's painful," he finished pathetically, wiping the back of his hand across his mouth with a grimace, the bloody streak on the back of his making Shuta's heart clench. Hizashi made a wounded sound from beside of him, and Midnight's face was frozen into a mixture of shock and nausea. Katsuki punched Izuku's shoulder, voice high and slightly hysterical. "Did you lose brain cells while you were away? You could have just told them. There was no need for a demonstration." "Idiot Deku." For the first time, Shoyuta saw Izuku look subdued, a bashful smile crossing his face. Sorry, Kaken. Heroes have always been better at practical lessons in my experience. Nedzu interrupted before the two could get too involved in their conversation. Then how would you break the terms of the contract? You told the detective and Eraserhead that you would die if you broke them, yet you seem unable to break them. Izuku shook his head. I was given a 3 strikes and you're out type restriction. If I attempt to break my contract more than 3 times in the space of 24 hours, then I'll die. Each time I try to break it, it gets more painful, and that carries over into the next 24 hours. It originally started as a simple pinching feeling. Nedzu nodded in understanding. Shoyuta just felt sick. Very well. Then, for the sake of your safety and our peace of mind, we will avoid questions of your unknown time. Let us instead discuss what led us here. You believed that you would be forced to live as a pet, correct? Izuku gave a stiff nod. Wasn't so much a belief, but more of a logical conclusion, but yes. Shoyuta gave a sigh, angry once again with himself. He was a man of logic, he could easily see how Izuku came to that conclusion, but he couldn't see it until it was too late. He should have known, he should have been better. Izuku, he said. I'm sorry. Vlad shifted slightly, and Shoyuta shot him a dirty look. Better remember this a-hole, he thought violently in the man's direction, though he knew it did no good. This is the one and only time you'll ever see Aizawa Shoyuta apologize. It was never our intention to force you to live as anything outside of your comfort zone. If you want to be fully human all the time, that's fine. If you want to be half human, half lion, that's fine too. Hell, if you wanted to be a pufferfish, we would buy a fish tank for you. All we want is to help you be safe and to regain some type of normalcy in your life. Izuku's gaze softened, but he still looked at the two of them warily. Shoyuta sighed once again. He knew it wouldn't be that easy. You don't believe him, Nedzu remarked, making Midnight snort in amusement. Yagi shot the woman a glare, but Shoyuta agreed with her. Nedzu really knew how to state the obvious. Izuku gave the chimera a significant look. One animal to another, he began, leaning forward slightly and making direct eye contact. Would you? The question went unanswered as Katsuki interrupted by smacking his slightly sparking hands on the table. This entire mess has an easy solution, he declared. Zuzu comes and lives with me. There were several immediate vetoes to his idea, making the boys' explosions grow louder, yet still relatively harmless. And why the if not? I know him, he knows me, we're the perfect team. He's technically still in witness protection, Cementos pointed out, ever the voice of reason. He needs protection. Katsuki gave a cruel smirk, hands curving to cradle his explosions, which became slightly more substantial. I've been protecting the nerd since he was born, and I'll be doing it till I die. I'll be dead if I let some 2-bit extras take my job. The declaration was so out of character for the boy that the room went silent, observing the two as if they might be able to catch a glimpse of the bond that tied them so tightly together. Katsuki stood slightly in front of Izuku's chair, their positions from earlier reversed as he was now the one to stand between a threat and his friend. Izuku gazed up at the boy, eyes practically stars as he muttered a soft, "Kaken's so amazing." That is not the way the law works, young Bakugu, Yagi said gently, patting the table placatingly. Katsuki opened his mouth to respond, words forming into a sneer, but was cut off by the impressively loud voice of Vlad. Should we not ask the boy what he wishes to do? All heads turned to look at Izuku, who sniffed daintily. I don't have a choice, really. Hizashi took a breath, probably to argue that Izuku always had a choice, when Nedzu chuckled and drew the attention to himself. As astute as expected. No, you do not have a choice. However, there is a loophole. UA has been approved as a safe house for you, the Yamazawas being another. I have been working on a plan for dorms on campus for quite some time, and this provides the perfect motivation to accelerate my plans. Ken, how long would it take you to build the dorms I have shown you? The humanoid thought for a few moments before responding. A few weeks, perhaps. Nedzu nodded, though he probably already knew that. Then I propose this, live with the Yamazawas for the time being. The 10 UA, Start your path to recovering yourself and becoming a hero. The dorms will become one of UA's top priorities, and you will be allowed to move in as early as possible. Does that suit you? Izuku sat quietly in contemplation for several moments before nodding. Netsu clapped once again, seemingly signaling the end of the meeting. Wonderful. Now, I implore you to try and see the good in this situation. It is less than ideal, yes, but all of the best things come from poor situations. The Yamazawas are good people, one animal to another. The Chimera exited the room with a flourish, his parting words making Izuku glance at Hizashi and Aizawa before resolutely looking away from them, his face set dangerously close to a pout. That went rather well, I suppose, Yagi blithely commented, a large all-might smile crossing his face. Shoyuta was hit with the urge to hit the other man. He entertained it for a few moments before discarding it and standing. We should probably head back. He pointedly looked at Midnight, who cheerfully looked away. You both were out longer than expected, it's well past school time now. The other teachers took that as their signal to leave, several cheerful good lucks being called in their direction, leaving just him, his husband, and the two boys in the room. Well, let's get to it. They strolled out of the school, and towards the train station, Katsuki and Izuku keeping themselves behind and slightly to the side of the two men. Shoyuta resolutely ignored the prickling that pierced his spine at having two people in his blind spot. They made it to the station, surrounded by enough people that being silent shouldn't be awkward, yet it was. Sensei, a low voice said from his left, Shoyuta looking down and seeing Katsuki standing there, his eyes never leaving his friend's form, Izuku looking curiously around the train station, form still lionless. I could never repay you for bringing him back, Katsuki continued, voice still low. But I'll never forgive you if you're the reason I lose him again. Aizawa watched as Izuku laughed delightedly at a small girl with fins around her head, his tail and ears popping back into existence and making her laugh. Neither would I. Some time later the three once again stood in the hallway outside of the Yamazawa apartment, the broken window having been speedily repaired and the door looming before them. Izuku's ears were pricked forwards, twitching and swiveling at every little noise, his nose doing the same, his tail waving in the air. He had been that way ever since leaving Katsuki's side, the other boy promising to see him at school the following day and leaving with pointed glares at the adults. Something smells good, Izuku commented, so out of the blue that it made Shoyuta snort and Hizashi chuckle. They exchanged a glance. Izuku may be largely a mystery, but he was still a teenage boy. They were teachers and parents, they could handle this. Hizashi pushed open the door, Izuku following warily and Shoyuta bringing up the rear. They towed off their shoes and a mess of purple leaned out from behind a doorway with a called greeting. Welcome back. I started supper. A loud grumble drew all their attention to Izuku, and Hizashi once again laughed. Sounds like we were right on time, he gently ribbed, padding into the kitchen. Shoyuta followed him, watching as the two teens regarded each other. Izuku was taut like a strung bow, eyes darting about Shinsu's form as he studied him, the calculating glint in his eyes making Shoyuta slightly wary. I'm Hitoshi, he offered, fondness for his normally shy son filling Shoyuta. Izuku, came the hesitant reply. Shinso nodded, continuing the conversation with a casualness that should have felt forced, but didn't. We have stir-fry because that's the only thing I can make. Hope you're not too picky. Izuku snorted, relaxing slightly around someone his own age. I burn water. I never said it wasn't burnt, Shinso shot back. A peal of laughter escaped Izuku before he slammed a hand over his mouth, eyes darting up as if he was expecting to be reprimanded. The conditioned response made Shuta's heart shrivel a little more, but he ignored the blip and moved to grab a plate. We get takeout on days that end in ma. Izuku's face filled with confusion as he accepted the food, sniffing at it. But they all do. Hizashi winked, picking up on the joke. That's the whole point. Izuku smiled slightly, Shinso dragging him into another conversation as the adults gathered their own food. Will we be able to do this, Sho? Hizashi murmured, leaning on him slightly. Shoyuta leaned against him, taking comfort in his husband. We have to, Shoyuta responded, watching as Shinso tried to drag another laugh out of the other boy. We have to. Izuku's eyes opened as he stepped from the realm of sleep into the realm of consciousness, breathing and body staying relaxed and unchanging almost instinctively as he laid on the bed, head pillowed on his arms, staring at but not seeing an unfamiliar ceiling. He waited for a few minutes, muscle memory telling him that as soon as his breathing or body indicated he was awake, his father would come in the room and give him some task to do. Anger flooded him as he shifted purposefully in defiance, but it just as quickly faded away into weariness. No matter how long he had been away from the man, his father still influenced his life. A glance at the clock told him that the day had faded into the next morning, but only barely. His eyes returned to the ceiling, thoughts filling his head. He was exactly where he wanted to be, more or less, yet it felt strange. He had been building this plan to dismantle his father's empire since the day he had lost his mother. It had been his motivation and desire for the past half a decade, literally the one thing that had kept him going. Now that the cogs were moving, he almost didn't know what to do with himself. It was his dream being realized, but it was still so strange. He didn't expect to be housed by an underground hero and his family, but here he was. He didn't expect to ever see his childhood best friend, but Kaken was just a train ride away. He certainly never thought he would be able to enroll in UA as a hero student, but his first day of class was the next day, or rather, later that day. It made something warm curl in his gut. The sound of a door creaking pulled him from his thoughts, and he rolled off the bed smoothly and silently, form shifting and feathers sprouting as he crouched under the bed in the form of a barn owl, eyes firmly trained on the now open door. He could clearly see Hitoshi's form in the doorway, as well as the boy frowning at the empty bed. "Izuku!" he called quietly, stepping slightly into the room. Izuku shuffled out from underneath the bed, form flowing upwards as he shifted from owl to half-lion, his night vision changing slightly but staying overall the same. Hitoshi startled. "Give a dude a heart attack, why don't you?" He shrugged in response. Hitoshi quirked an eyebrow. "You couldn't sleep either? I'm going to get a snack, wanna go with?" Izuku nodded, not feeling particularly talkative at the moment. He padded softly after the boy to the kitchen, watching as he easily maneuvered around furniture and books on the floor. If he didn't know any better, he would think that Hitoshi had a stealth quirk. Hitoshi turned on a small light on the microwave, puttering around the kitchen as he pulled mugs and containers from the cabinets. A few minutes later, they were leaning against counters on opposite sides of the kitchen, Izuku munching on some sort of cookies and Hitoshi languidly sipping coffee. "I don't think coffee will help us sleep," Izuku commented, but sipped his coffee anyway. Shinso gave a smirk. "I never said it was to help us sleep." Izuku's lips quirked upwards as well, mirroring the other boy's smirk. This was nice, Izuku realized, the small glow in his gut pulsing slightly. He enjoyed just existing here with someone his own age. His smirk fell slightly as he recalled the few other people close to his age that he had been around in the past few years. Wondered how they were doing. A shuffling from the doorway brought him out of his thoughts, his eyes easily picking up the lax form of Aizawa standing in the doorway. He snorted. The hero was a mirror image of how Hitoshi looked, hair wild and eyebags sagging. He gave a soft sort of scowl at them. "If there's still coffee left, I might let you two stay up." Hitoshi held out a black mug with simple white whiskers on it. "Of course, Dad. I learned from the best." The cup was accepted with a grunt of thanks, and the two teens trailed after the older man as he made his way to sit around the small table in the living room. He reached into a basket beside it, procuring a deck of cards and shuffling them easily. They fell into a quiet, comfortable silence. Izuku slowly relaxed, his ears and tail fading without his notice, but the other two shared a glance. They played round after round, the world outside slowly growing brighter, occasional jabs at the loser's expense being the only thing to break the peace. That is, until Hizashi woke. Izuku watched in amusement as the blonde started to scold Aizawa, hands flying in movements to match his words. The two bickered softly, Izuku and Hitoshi retreating to their separate rooms with a shared smirk. Izuku gently closed the door, leaning back against it. His eyes caught on the mirror on the opposite side of the room, and he froze. A small smile was frozen on his face, a genuine thing he hadn't seen in a long time. His fingers slowly traced the bottom line of his lip, finding the dimple on his cheek that he got from his mom. His hand fell back against the door silently. Contentment filled him as he thought of his short time with Hitoshi and Aizawa, rushing through him like the first warm breeze of the spring. It joined the warm feeling that he had first felt when waking up, and gave it a name. It was hope. Kirishima sat in his chair, leg bouncing as his eyes darted between the large door and the clock on the wall. The normally rowdy classroom was a quiet sort of loud, the students trying to force normalcy while also ignoring the elephant in the room. The elephant being that just the day before one of the strongest people in their class had been attacked by a lion, that also happened to be a bird, that was actually a boy, who also happened to know said classmate's name and seemed extremely protective of him. The last they had seen of Bakugo was his prone body being carried away by a clone of ectoplasm, after going ballistic to try and reach the unknown boy. Kaminari was the one to voice everyone's thoughts. Do we think he'll be okay? That was weird, right? Please tell me that I'm not the only one that thought that that was weird. Mina gave an overdramatic sigh. Thank you. It was weird. I've never seen him act like that before. And Aizawa was totally freaked, wasn't he? Momo was the one to answer from the front of the room, turning slightly in her chair to speak. It does no good to speculate and guess. I'm sure that if anything serious had occurred then Aizawa-sensei would tell us. Kirishima sighed, knowing her words were true. Yeah, but I just wish we knew that Bakugo was okay. It was a real lion and dash, a voice cut him off. You'd think that by now you extras would know that it'll take a lot more than a FNG lion to get me down. Kirishima darted up from his seat, eyes settling on the form of his friend standing just inside the doorway, head thrown back and a proud smirk on his face. Bakugo! There were several calls of welcome and surprise, which quickly shifted to warnings and concern as the form behind their classmate was noticed. The green-haired boy was easily as tall as Bakugo, and built only slightly smaller, his posture an almost perfect copy of Bakugo's relaxed confidence. An almost identical smirk was on his face, though it was made much more devious by the fangs on display. Twitching, fawn-colored ears peeked out from his bushy hair, matched by the slender tailing waving in the air behind him. His tie was missing, like Bakugo's, and the suit jacket undone to expose the white shirt underneath. Kirishima reacted as soon as he got out of his shock, rushing forward and hardening his skin as he prepared to fight for his friend. He was stopped short by a series of small explosions, Bakugo's face becoming a feral sort of snarl that Kirishima only ever saw in battle. Don't effing touch him! Kirishima reared back in shock. Bakugo! A slender, freckle-studded hand was laid on Bakugo's shoulder, the action that would have normally garnered an explosion to the face only serving to make him marginally relax. Calm down, Kaken. The name was said with familiarity as piercing green eyes studied the room, a hungry look in them. It's not like they could, even if they wanted to. The words made Bakugo snort, his form immediately relaxing as he strode towards his desk, ignoring the class as he was prone to do. Go ahead and break their hearts, why don't you? The boy grinned again, leaning against Aizawa's podium as the picture of calm and collected, the teasing smile still playing on his face. It was a tense moment as he studied the class and the class studied him, unsure of what to do. Aizawa entered the room a moment later, a dark glare causing the boy to move leisurely from the podium to a place beside it. This is Izuku. Their teacher's words were short and clipped. Due to extenuating circumstances, he will be joining Class 1A. Any questions? There were many, but none voiced aloud, causing their teacher to nod once and slip into his sleeping bag. Izuku stepped forward slightly, giving an almost mocking approximation of a bow to them before sliding into the empty seat behind Bakugo and in front of Hitoshi, who had slipped in unnoticed during the commotion. Bakugo whirled to straddle his seat backwards, voice brimming with amusement. You're a cocky motherfucker, Deku. Izuku seemed to preen under the words. Is it cocky if it's the truth? Besides, I get it from you. Bakugo snorted. I'm a saint, if anything I get it from you. Izuku opened his mouth to reply, but their banter was interrupted by Kaminari, the ever-brave soul. So I'm assuming that you two know each other? Both boys' heads whipped to face him, eyes narrowing in twin expressions of distaste at being interrupted. Kaminari gulped but plowed on. I mean, it's a logical assumption. Izuku's face smoothed into something more neutral, glancing at Bakugu to meet his gaze. I grew up with the nerd, Bakugu said, seeming to take pleasure in the shock that his declaration caused. I'm fairly certain I even changed his shitty diapers. Izuku's ears flattened, an affronted, cat-like hiss coming from his mouth. Oh please, you're only a few months older than me. And I'm literally the one who taught you how to change your cousin's diapers. It made Bakugu pause for a moment. That was you? I could have sworn it was Mom. Izuku rolled his eyes, turning away in a clear dismissal. You're an idiot. He gave a small nod to Kaminari. We've known each other since forever ago. Kirishima couldn't help but feel slightly suspicious. That's strange, because we haven't heard of you ever, actually. Izuku shrugged. I had to move away when I was 10. The first time I'd seen Kakin in years was the other day. He blushed slightly. I might have got a bit too excited. Mina gasped dramatically once again. Were you Birdie? I thought it was the same bird, but you were flying so fast I couldn't see for sure. Caw, Izuku deadpanned, making Bakugu sock him in the shoulder. The green-haired boy stuck his tongue out in the other's direction, and Kirishima nearly fainted when the childish action was returned. Izuku opened his mouth to respond but was cut off by the faint chiming of bells, signaling the end of homeroom and the beginning of hero ethics and law. Aizawa rose from his sleeping bag, turning on a projector and surveying the room, effectively silencing it. With one last glance, Kirishima settled in his seat and pulled out his notebook, focusing on the front. 3 more class PRDS and then they could ask the 2 boys more questions at lunch. He gave a determined nod, staring at the back of a green head heatedly. It couldn't be that bad. Kirishima slammed his lunch tray onto the table, quietly seething. He was said. He could handle not knowing about this person that was apparently a large part of his closest friend's life, and he could handle the boy being given special treatment by the teachers, who were clearly hiding something. But he couldn't handle the boy being a good student. He had expected him to be silent, taking in the atmosphere of the school, getting a feel for the lessons and topics. It had to have been different from wherever he had come from. But no, he easily took in the topics, asking questions that made Kirishima's head spin, engaging with the teachers in a way that Kirishima had only ever seen Bakugu and Momo do. And the worst part of it was that the others liked it. Izuku was smart, and his questions led to debates that allowed them to see the topic in a new light and gain a deeper understanding, often given with a joke or two. He made connections that Kirishima couldn't even see, but made perfect sense afterwards. He matched Bakugu discussion for discussion, Socratic in a way that was both academic and easy to understand. He had even got into a slightly heated argument with Midnight about something in art history, and was right. The class loved him, his confident words and quiet charm seeming to make them forget all about his mysterious past with Bakugu. But not Kirishima. He would get to the bottom of whatever was going on between the 2 of them, and the teachers, even if he had to do it alone. Mina sat on one side of him, Kaminari on the other. Bakugu sat across from him, Shiro across from Kaminari, and Izuku across from Mina. So, Mina began eagerly, locking eyes with Kirishima in a way that he knew meant she had just as many questions as he did. Kirishima gave a private smile. He could always count on her. How did you know all that stuff? I expected you to be smart, but that was on another level. Izuku shrugged, idly poking at his food. I had an extremely varied and thorough education. Shiro leaned around Bakugu to speak to him, chopsticks waving in the air. Sounds like Todoroki. Izuku's brow furrowed as Kaminari shot out of his seat to wave someone over. Who's Todoroki? He questioned as Bakugu gave a loud groan of protest and a "Don't invite the icy hot over here." It was too late. The heterochromatic boy was already approaching, pulling up a chair and sitting on Shiro and Kaminari's end of the table. Hello, he said plainly, nodding slightly at them. Izuku had caused the boy to defrost somewhat when he had made a comment about Endeavor and his lack of ethics in class, easily rattling off damage and death statistics from the top of his head. Oh, Izuku murmured, eyeing him with an eager look that Kirishima had seen the few times that someone used a quirk in class. 2 quirks, boy. The chatter at the table quieted, all of them looking at Todoroki first and Izuku second. They hadn't officially introduced their quirks yet. Izuku shook himself, seeming to come out of stupor, and gave a smooth smile. It's the hair and eyes. 87% of dual quirk wielders have some type of heterochromia, and 100% have it in both hair and eyes. The explanation was accepted easily enough, though Kirishima seemed to be the only one that caught the thoughtful gaze on Bakugo landing on his friend. Todoroki dipped his head slightly. Yes, it's fire and ice. However, I don't use my fire to fight. Izuku pet his head, and the question was out before anyone could stop him. Why not? Todoroki's walls came back up in an instant, his face growing impassive. I wouldn't expect you to understand. He stood from the table, but was stopped by Izuku's words, whose eyes seeming to glow. Take it from me, if you keep carrying this burden it'll give you nothing but heartache and pain in the end. It's your quirk and your power. To allow someone else to control your actions is to allow them to win. His cryptic words caused a clear reaction in the other boy, a small flame flickering to life in his hair before sputtering out as his eyes grew wide. How do you dash? Todoroki was cut off by a soft chiming that had the heroic students in the cafeteria scramble to leave. It was the 5-minute warning bell, and it took 5 minutes to get to the locker room to change for heroics. Izuku gave a smile to Todoroki, as sunny as the sky outside, and whisked away, followed by Bakugo who seemed to be scolding him in low tones. There's something going on, Kirishima muttered, watching them disappear from the cafeteria. It might be a good thing, Mina said gently from his side, nudging him slightly. We should trust Bakugo. Kirishima was still unsure, but Shiro chimed in. Yeah. Plus, I don't really get the vibes that Izuku would do anything to hurt him. If anything, the two are almost too protective of each other. Yeah. Kirishima muttered. Maybe you're right. He hoped they were right. Kirishima watched out of the corner of his eye as Izuku nodded to whatever Bakugo was saying to him, voices too low to be heard, even though they stood barely a few meters from where Kirishima loitered with the rest of his and Bakugo's friends, too awkward to insert themselves into the conversation but too unsure to leave them alone. Bakugo seemed to notice them, and shoved an elbow into the other boy's side, which Kirishima tried not to notice was slightly more gentle than normally, and the two seemingly had a conversation without words that ended with Bakugo reaching up to flick a rounded ear, making it flutter back and forth on Izuku's head and a playful scowl coat his face. They joined the others, and Mina eagerly took the opportunity to continue her questioning that had been interrupted at lunch. So why are you always half-lion? I would get tired of being just one animal if I could change into any of them. Izuku shrugged, idly picking at his sleeve. It was the first animal I transformed into when I was a kid, and it just became my favorite. The traits of a lion are simple but effective. I'll switch if the situation calls for it. So it's like a comfort thing? Kaminari questioned. You were pretty out of it when Aizawa-sensei erased your quirk yesterday. No. Izuku denied vehemently, ears flattened to his head and tail waving wildly. His eyes flashed and his lips started creeping back to expose more of his very sharp teeth. The reaction lasted barely a second, overtaken by a startled sound leaving his mouth as Bakugo grabbed the end of his tail and yanked on it. It was just a question, he said, voice even but with a slight hint of warning to it. He didn't mean anything by it. Izuku blinked once before his shoulders relaxed slightly. The group paused talking but it picked back up easily enough, them being used to outbursts from Bakugo. Izuku continued responding to their questions, his answer ranging from a slight ramble to vague to outright changing the subject. Every time he avoided a question, the heavy feeling in Kirishima's gut grew heavier. They were hiding something, and it was something big. Just as he opened his mouth to comment on it, a cough from the edge of their group drew his attention. Todoroki stood there, ever so slightly awkward, but still staring confidently at Izuku. Earlier in class you implied that we wouldn't be able to lay a hand on you, even if we wanted to. Izuku turned slightly to face him, arms crossing in front of him as his stance shifted wider. I did. Over-exaggerating your abilities will get you killed in the field. Izuku pet his head slightly, a playful smile on his face. And only using half of yours will do the same. The air between the two grew tense, But before it could escalate, Aizawa clapped his hands once from the front of the group. In the quirk assessment test, you were able to see your classmates' handle on their quirk. In the battle training, you were able to see what technical skills they possessed. Now, you will be able to experience them firsthand. Today we will be doing a bracket battle. Not only will you be able to see where you rank amongst your classmates, it will also prepare you for future activities at UA. He motioned to a whiteboard standing beside him, which Kirishima vaguely remembered Yamamo creating earlier while they were talking. There were the bare bones of a bracket outline on it, student names filling the beginning 20 spaces. The matches were decided randomly by pulling names from a hat. Each match will last 4 minutes. The first person to get the other pinned to the ground, or unable to keep fighting, for 3 seconds will move on. There are no boundaries, but please try to not harm the watching students. No permanent blows. Recovery girl can't heal everything. Any questions? None were voiced, so Aizawa nodded decisively. First match, Kaminari versus Izuku. Step up. A calm settled over Izuku, a welcome weight on his shoulders and seeping into his bones. Fighting was something he knew, something he was good at. This would be a piece of cake. Plus the chance to see 20 new quirks in action? It was practically a dream. The calm in his bones slowly shifted into an itch that demanded to be scratched as he stretched, bending and contorting his body in familiar ways as he loosened his ligaments and muscles. The more relaxed he was, the easier it was to rapidly shift. But, he mused as he studied Kaminari, the boy easily standing a little ways away from him, rubbing his hands together but doing nothing more to prepare. I might not even need to shift. Aizawa stood at the midpoint between the two, slightly off to the side. He gestured at Kaminari. Ready? The boy nodded, holding 2 thumbs up as a bright smile crossed his face. Aizawa turned to Izuku. Ready? Izuku slid into a predominantly animalistic state, though still humanoid. He gave a snarl followed by a loud yowl, reveling in the way it made several students jump. Begin! The word was barely uttered before Izuku's strengthened back legs were digging into the ground, propelling him towards the other boy. He darted slightly past him, fur crackling as electricity gathered around them, but still entirely too slow. He smoothly transitioned back to his favored form. You take too long to gather power for your attacks. It leaves you open and undefended. He punctuated his words with a pivoting kick, his left foot staying firmly planted even as his right foot swung around in a half-circle and connected with Kaminari's rib cage. The force sent the boy flying up into the side, though Izuku followed through, his heel staying firmly connected to the other boy. In a show of flexibility and strength, he used his leg to change Kaminari's direction, slamming the boy brutally into the ground. Spit flew from Kaminari's mouth as he gasped and fought for air, writhing on the ground. Izuku stepped back from him a few paces, eyes slitted and firmly planted on him, as if daring the boy to continue fighting. Aizawa counted down, voice grim and the only sound besides Kaminari's stilted breaths. Izuku wins. The words seemed to be a signal for Kaminari's friends to move, crowd around the boy and help him to his feet. Zero ducked under his arm, half supporting his friend. I'm fine. Kaminari protested weakly, waving a hand around as sparks jumped harmlessly off it. That was a gnarly kick, man. I didn't even see it coming. Your elbows were too far away from your body, Bakugo sneered, though it wasn't malicious. Still just as sloppy as when we were kids. Izuku sked, turning his head away and pouting. I was only sloppy around you. Someone had to boost your ego. Big words for a little nerd. Bakugo crowed in return, stepping back as Aizawa called for the next pair, causing Kirishima to step forwards. Let's see how well that attitude holds up against me. You have to win first, Kaken. So do you. The blonde shot back, making Izuku turn to eye Kirishima in a way that made his spine crawl. He shook his shoulders out and cracked his knuckles in determination before hardening his arms and slamming them together in a shower of sparks. Don't worry, he said, smiling widely and liking his fangs. I will. Irritation flashed through Kirishima and he let that show on his face, baring his own sharp teeth at the boy. No matter how fast he is, he thought to himself as he crouched down lower to the ground. I'll be ready for him. Aizawa called start, and Kirishima tensed, preparing for the devastatingly quick blow from before. Except, it never came. He looked at Izuku in confusion, the boy contentedly standing with his hands in his pockets. He pet an eyebrow as if to say, "Well? What's taking so long?" It was baiting and Kirishima knew it. He still fell for it though. He darted in low to the ground, hardening his fist right as he threw it into a punch, Izuku pivoting slightly to avoid it. Kirishima continued his barrage, even going as far as to include his limited knowledge of kicks, Izuku easily pivoting and weaving around them, not a movement out of place. His hands still stayed in his pockets, his tail allowing him to keep in balance in the dance only he knew the moves to, drawing Kirishima around the entirety of the field. In desperation, Kirishima swiped a hand at the ground, flinging up a smattering of dirt at the other boy. It coated his eyes, causing him to close them and take a step back in the cloud of dust flitting slowly through the air. Kirishima followed him forwards, pressing his advantage, fists swinging wildly. He burst through the cloud of dust only to scramble backwards as he came face to furry face of an abnormally large brown bear. "Sheet!" he yelped, Izuku roaring at him. The boy bear pursued him, standing up on two legs and towering over him, long claw-tipped, trash-can lid-sized paws swiping at him. Kirishima kept scrambling backwards, barely avoiding the swiping and slapping paws by throwing his body this way and that. A paw landed on the side of his barely hardened face, sending him flying to the side. He rolled into a crouch, hardening his entire body and crossing his arms in preparation for the blow he was sure was coming. After a moment where nothing happened, he lowered his arms, peering cautiously around in front of him. Izuku was nowhere to be found, and he frowned in confusion. "This, prize," something hissed in his ear, a constricting weight wrapping around his body. He struggled, bones creaking and skin cracking as a snake covered in green-yellow scales wrapped around him, muscles jumping and contracting as it slowly choked him. A massive head rose above his body, staring down at him in a way that could only be described as indifferently. Cold fear shot through him as Kirishima tried to force his quirk to go harder. Izuku didn't care that this was only training, that they were just students. Izuku would kill him the instant his quirk failed. Shouting drew his attention and suddenly the weight wrapped around him was gone, the anaconda shifting back into Izuku's pure human form. The boy rolled backwards, eyes flashing to the side as Kirishima fought to gain his breath. "No permanent blows," Aizawa said, hair and capture weapon writhing around him as his eyes flashed red. His gaze was firmly planted on Izuku, the boy glaring just as venomously back at him. "This is your only warning." Izuku closed his eyes, taking a deep breath before straightening up. "The world won't pull their punches, so neither will I." He walked towards their teacher, stopping just to the left of him and studying him. Kirishima sat gingerly up, body sore as he let his quirk fade away. Kaminari appeared in his line of sight, extending a hand with a smile. "Thanks, man," he said as Kaminari helped him to his feet. The other boy just laughed, talking about the fight in a bright tone as if Kirishima hadn't just had his but handed to him. The two walked towards the rest of the students, Kirishima just barely able to catch the words that Izuku uttered to their teacher. "Never erase my quirk again." His voice was quiet but seemed to charge the air, Kirishima half expecting rolling thunderclouds to appear. "This is your only warning." He brushed past their teacher, plopping on the ground at the edge of the group of students and angrily plucking at the grass as his tail and ears made their reappearance. Aizawa drew their attention once again, calling Mina and Ojiro up for their fight. It effectively distracted his classmates, but Kirishima kept a wary eye on the greenette, unable to shake the feeling of something constricting around him. Izuku watched idly as the students continued to fight. It took almost the entire 4 minutes. Ojiro was a close-range fighter and Mina was able to make him keep his distance with her acid. However, it ate into the ground around them, creating potholes that she didn't notice. She misplaced her foot, causing her to stumble slightly and look down. Ojiro took the opening, darting in quickly to get behind her, placing her arms in a lock that meant if she sprayed her acid it would get on her as well as him. She tapped out after a moment, the two parting amicably. Izuku studied the tailed boy in interest. he would make for a good fight. The next match, Siro and Koda's, was even shorter, Siro easily using his tape to bind Koda before the shy boy could even get a word out. However, not 2 minutes later, Tsuyu did the same thing to him, her long tongue wrapping around him and holding him still. Throughout the entire fight, Kaken stood a short distance away, producing harmless sparklers from his palms and jumping lightly in place and shaking his arms out in preparation for his fight with Ida. Izuku eyed his shoe-clad feet in confusion, tilting his head towards his friend in question. He received a shake in response, the blonde walking away before Izuku could pursue that line of questioning. It made him frown slightly, but those thoughts were quickly put away as Aizawa called the beginning of the fight. As expected, the two were an even match. Ida obviously had the advantage of speed, but his bulk was counterproductive to that. Kaken was powerful, but his movements were slightly too telegraphed. Izuku's frown reappeared as he eagerly observed the two fighting. Something was off, but he just couldn't tell what. Eventually Kaken won, his delicate control over his quirk coupled with the sheer power of it proving too much for Ida to handle. The fight ended with Ida pinned to the ground, one of Kaken's hands in his face with the other raised, crackling over him. Kaken walked back towards him, a scowl on his face and his hands shoved in his pocket. "What?" he snapped at Izuku, who only shook his head and smiled wider. "Nothing," he replied honestly. "I just really want to fight you." Kaken snorted but didn't say anything, watching the remaining first rounds in silence. Izuku soaked in each of the new quirks, mentally making notes about how they were used and what could be improved. Aoyama was easily beaten by Hakigure, who was in turn beaten by Shoji and his multitude of ears. Shinso heckled Momo until she mistakenly replied, though he was hard-pressed to avoid her attacks from created weapons till she eventually slipped up. Uraraka fought Sato, the close fight coming to an end when she landed a five-fingered hit on the boy. However, he still got some good hits in. That's what led to Jiro winning against Uraraka, using her earphone jacks to amplify her heartbeat and disorientate the girl till she puked. The final fight of the first round was what prompted Izuku to finally break the silence, shaking his head as he observed Todoroki and Tokoyami dueling. Todoroki could win if he used his fire, Izuku pointed out, making Kaken tilt his head towards him in question. "What do you mean?" It was Izuku's turn to shake his head. "You'll figure it out." That was the first match that didn't have a clear end before time was called, leading to Aizawa calling Todoroki as the victor due to the fact that he landed more hits than Tokoyami did. "Not as disappointing as it could have been," the teacher drawled, though his voice seemed to contradict his words. These next 4 battles will determine the semi-finalist. Ojiro vs Izuku, Sui vs Bakugo, Shoji vs Shinso, and Jiro vs Todoroki. Tomorrow, each of you will be receiving a list of my observations about areas of improvement. Even if you are no longer fighting, I expect you to pay attention and learn from your mistakes. Understood? There was a chorus of affirmations and Aizawa nodded, beckoning up Izuku and Ojiro. The tailed boy settled into a readied stance, alert but not tense as he prepared to dodge or attack. Izuku studied his form, settling into a mirrored one and letting his ears and tail fade away, making the other boy blink in surprise. Izuku gave a predatory grin. "I'm more than just my quirk, you know." Aizawa called start and Ojiro sprung first, crossing the short distance easily with added momentum from his tail. He aimed a kick towards the inside of Izuku's knee, looking to quickly debilitate him. Izuku bounced out of the way, letting it thump to the ground and instantly striking back with an open-palmed strike towards Ojiro's face. The boy leaned back, grabbing Izuku's outstretched arm and attempting to pull him directly into a kick against his side, the awkward position supported by the boy's large tail. Izuku followed him instead of fighting to break his grasp, taking the kick to the side in return for clapping his hands against Ojiro's ears. The two flung apart, Ojiro shaking his head slightly as his ears rang and his eyes grew blurry. Izuku coughed and then spat at the ground, the kick stronger than he expected. This time the two lunged at each other at the same time, exchanging a flurry of blows and trying to turn their opponent's momentum and strikes against them. Izuku flipped backwards from a spinning leg and tail kick aimed at his head and his legs, distantly hearing Aizawa giving them the 1-minute warning. He landed, seeing the other boy following him to try and take him off guard, and instantly switched his stance. He angled slightly away from Ojiro, his hands rising to form loose fists in front of his face as his feet slid a bit farther apart. He met the oncoming feint head-on, his left arm stopping it dead, inches from his head, as his right hand shot out with all the power of his legs and hips behind it in a devastating punch. Izuku followed, grabbing the back of Ojiro's GI to hold him steady as he slammed his knee into Ojiro's stomach. He let the boy regain his footing before crowding him backwards, lightning-fast punches and feints keeping him off balance and with no room to prepare a strike. In a last-ditch effort his tail swiped out, knocking Izuku's feet out from underneath him. They grappled on the ground for a second before Izuku got a hold of Ojiro's arm, stretching it out and locking his legs around Ojiro's chest, the other boy struggling futilely to escape. Aizawa called time and Izuku released Ojiro, rolling off to the side before standing up, panting slightly. He wordlessly reached out, offering a hand to the boy. "What was that?" he gasped out as Izuku pulled him up. "Boxing?" Izuku nodded, and the other boy shook his head before bowing slightly. "Thanks for a good fight. You'll have to teach me some moves sometime." Izuku gave a slight bow back, rising with a crooked smirk. "I'd love a good rematch." They ambled back to join the class, the congratulations and exclamations aimed at them both making Ojiro awkwardly rub his head and Izuku just smile fiercely, his blood still boiling from the fights that were unsatisfying when compared to the ones from his past. He watched as Kaken and Sui squared off, his fingers once again idly plucking at the grass. He could admire the girl for the use of her quirk, somewhat similar to his shifting quirk, but he already knew what the outcome of this battle would be. He was proven correct when, at Aizawa's signal, Kaken bounded into action with a loud cry of "Die!" an explosion-fueled right hook swinging out. Sui dodged, barely, tongue lashing out at the boy without hesitation. Kaken reached out and grabbed onto the tongue, where his classmates had been too squeamish to touch the appendage, and used it to yank the girl towards him. In a few short moments he had her tangled up in her own tongue, foot planted firmly on her back and one glowing hand pointed down towards her as his other stabilized his wrist. Aizawa called the fight and walked over, helping the girl get untangled. Kaken ignored the class congratulations, plopping down on the ground an arm's length from Izuku as Shoji and Shinso took the field. He was quickly joined by his small group of friends, though they noticeably kept to one side of him, leaving Izuku alone on the other. "I'm actually not too bummed that I got out early," Kaminari started with a grin. "It's nice to just lay in the sun and watch you guys beat the shit out of each other." "Better not let Sensei hear you say that, he might use you to make an example." Mina teased him, laughing as the boy paled before straightening up and laser-focusing on the ongoing fight. It was a curious fight, Shinso obviously no match for Shoji's strength, but having him beat in the agility department. He was dodging and weaving around the boy, everything from jokes to insults pouring from his mouth as he tried to get Shoji to answer him. It was only when Aizawa gave the 1-minute warning did Shinso abandon his dodging, instead diving to tackle the other boy. They landed on the ground, scrambling around, and Shinso dug his foot into the eye on one of the tentacles, making Shoji cry out in pain. He stopped, concern crossing his face. "I'm so sorry, are you okay?" Shoji nodded, a mouth going to respond. "Yeah, I'm Dash." He went limp, a smile slashing through Shinsu's concerned act as he took control right as the whistle blew. "Gotcha." He released it, stepping off the larger boy who was slowly shaking himself out of the stupor he was in. "Very clever," Shoji remarked. It was acknowledged with a hesitant nod from Shinso, the two of them making their way back to the group. Izuku nodded at Shinso as he flopped down with a barely concealed groan beside him, making Izuku let out a chuff of amusement. "Changing the tempo was a neat move," he said slowly, even as Todoroki and Jiro took their places. Shinso sat up, cutting his eyes at the other. "That's exactly what Aizawa called it. It's a common thing, it's the same as what I did with Ojiro. Get them used to the fight and then flip the script from what they're expecting. It normally gives an opening." Izuku watched with interest as Todoroki stomped his foot and ice encased Jiro up to the shoulder, rendering her immobile, though the ice did shudder slightly from the half-charged sound wave she had prepared. She tilted her head back to the sky as Todoroki started to slowly melt the ice around her, and Izuku snorted as he heard the muttered curses falling from her lips. Her near-silent curses were drowned out by a heartfelt F from Shinso, who turned to look at Izuku with wide eyes. Todoroki won. Izuku nodded slowly, not quite understanding. Shinso pressed on. I'm screwed.